Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and a warm welcome to everybody for our council meeting and especially deliberations for our annual budget of Wednesday the 31st of May 2023. So we will look at our agenda. I'd like to invite Councillor Fitzgerald to open our meeting formally with karakia. Councillor.
Tēnā koe te rangatia, tēnā koutou e te whare, koutou kei rongo i te matanui, no rei me karakia tātou. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumie, uie, tāiki. Mr Mayor, thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. To those online, welcome. Our meeting's been recorded, been live streamed on our council's YouTube channel. Our health and safety procedures are well known to everybody in the gallery, and in the unlikely event of an evacuation, please make your way through the green signed doors, and we have the evacuation area or assembly area at the base of the clock tower in Te Maraehine, the square. Building's a non-smoking facility, and again, unlike the event of needing a defibrillator, that is located at the front of house on the ground floor. Our toilets through the link span as you've come in. And please, any incidents, please report those to our committee administration. We have nobody online. We're all present. That's great. And just for speakers, in terms of officers, if you could please, the first time, if you just perhaps give your name and your title for those online. So, right, our first item, there is no apologies. Everyone's here for the day or two. We have our, in terms of to have a full and open discussion today, we will need to resolve adopting a debating style, and that's item 8 of our annual budget deliberations, and that's standing order 2.12.1, and I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no comments, we will vote on this, please. That's passed, 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we'll move through to receiving a late item, and this is around notification of this, and it's around remit to Local Government New Zealand annual general meeting, and it's around receiving the late item for the following reasons. It was received after the agenda was published, and the urgency is around Whanganui District Council requesting a response by Friday. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any comments to why we shouldn't receive this or receive it? There being none, we will vote. And that has passed, 16 votes for and none against. We'll look to debate that later on. Now, number 4 in our order paper is declarations of interest. And I'll go to the Deputy Mayor first.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor. A declaration of interest re the Globe.
Right, thank you. And Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, thank you. Just in relation to item 10, I declared an interest in that at the time that it was debated in for the Community Committee, and I'm just indicating that because of that I will abstain when that matter comes to up on the agenda. Thank you.
Great, thank you. No others? That's good, thank you. Right, we'll move through to number 5, any public comment. I haven't received any, and there's nothing from the floor. And then number 6 is confirmation of our minutes, that we resolve the minutes of the council meeting of 16th and 17th of May 2023, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in regards to attendance, I have an apology for the first day, but because the meeting straddled 2 days, my attendance is not noted as entering the meeting, as there are examples on the first day of councillors entering the meeting, and yet, even into the evening session...
You don't have to explain too much further. We can adjust the
Adjust
minutes
that? Yeah, so I was there for the second...
to acknowledge your attendance on the second day. Okay, no other matters arising. We'll look to vote on this. Thank you. As passed, 16 votes for, none against. Right, we now get through to committee recommendations, and the first one's around our strategy and finance meeting of the 10th of May 2023, and I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Dennison, to speak to those.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. No need to speak. I'd just like to stand to move that Council resolves to adopt the committee recommendations. Mr Mayor, thank you, and look for a seconder.
Councillor Naylor, thank you. All right, are there any matters arising from those? There being none, we will vote, please. And that's passed. 15 votes for, 1 abstention. Right. We now move through to committee recommendations from our Community Committee of the 24th of May 23, and I'll ask the Chair, Councillor Johnson, to speak to that.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So I'd like to present the Part 1 Public Community Committee's recommendation from the 24th of May 2023 for adoption.
And a seconder?
Councillor Hancock. Sorry, he can't second.
No, Councillor Meehan, thank you. All right, no matters arising. We will vote, please. As passed, 12 votes for and 4 abstentions. Thank you. Okay, we move through to our late item around the remit to LGNZ from Whanganui District Council. Now there's a paper on page 5 of your item, your late papers, and it is around whether we endorse or we don't endorse their remit proposal on the reduction of audit fees from Audit New Zealand. And the paper is pretty self-explanatory, and the rationale for their remit is on page 9 and through to 11. So, quite happy to take any comments or questions of the officers on that. If I could just get perhaps our Chief Financial Officer, are we facing these same issues as well here, Cam?
Mr Mayor, yes, I just had our catch up with our audit team here this week, and the sector as a whole is facing some substantial increases in audit fees. Some of them are one-off because of new standards, but there is actually from their perspective, they're playing catch-up where they've got cost pressures that they have no choice but to pass on. So yes, we are facing them.
Okay, and are they on time?
In terms of our council, we've been fortunate that we've been able to adopt within statutory timeframes, perhaps in a better position than a lot of others. They are still completing some audits from the previous financial year. I'll just remind you that the statutory extension that was provided post-COVID has now ended, so the statutory deadline is now 31 October. we are scheduled to adopt by then.
Thank you. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Which of our CCOs will be affected by this?
That's a good question. I'm not sure the size of the increase that they would receive, but I would presume all of our CCOs that go through an audit will be facing some form of increase from Audit New Zealand. But I can't give you an answer as to specifically how much that looks like. The discussion I've been part of has been more to the local government sector as a whole, and that's going through moderation at the moment at OAG level.
So we don't know if it's 10, 15, 20%?
No, but I do have an inclination that it is in the double-digit realm.
Okay.
Could you be a little bit more, that could be 50%, it could be 11%?
I would say it's probably in the 15 to 20%.
Okay.
Can I comment now? I'm very happy to support this. I think our CCOs can't afford this kind of increase, so I'm very happy to support this. Thank you.
So we've got a mover. Have we got a seconder? I'm quite happy to second it. If I could give you some context, I was trying to get the officers to perhaps do that as well. I understand audit fees in the general realm are up around 30% around the country. We've been lucky and probably, I shouldn't say lucky, but well-managed relationship between Audit New Zealand and our officers. But there are some, even south of here, who have not had last year's annual report audited yet. And that's terrible from, you've got no choice. You have to go through the audit office. So I think sometimes you do need to just, it's a check and balance. And I think if we don't speak up, then we'll just get what we get. Because it is a monopoly arrangement where books do need to be audited, but there also needs to be some balance around what we're paying. Wanganui obviously have some CCOs, and they're looking at perhaps over 100% increase. That might be a little bit different to what we could be facing, but for those around the table, we can remember in the days when Acacia Birch was a CCO, their biggest cost was the audit from the New Zealand Audit Office. I'm on the Performing Arts Trust. Our biggest cost was the audit from the New Zealand Audit Office. So I think we should just check, it's a check and balance, and I don't think there's any harm in saying, please, New Zealand Audit Office, can you just double check and have some balance in your increases? So I'm happy to support this. Okay, no other comments? Does the mover want to write a reply there? No? Okay, we'll vote on this, please. And it's passed 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right. We now have item number 7, which is around urban growth work programme and budgetary needs for the 23-24 financial year. So I invite David Murphy and Michael Dondram up to speak. Gentlemen, page 21 of your papers, councillors.
Morena koutou councillors, thank you Mr Mayor. We're going to take the report as read. Obviously we're happy to answer any questions. This report was requested by council when they were considering the quarterly performance report earlier in the year, and prior to that been a number of questions, particularly in relation to the performance measure regarding land supply and infrastructure ready land. So just thank you to Michael for his contribution to the report. Also acknowledge the work by Jono Ferguson-Pye. He's on some extended annual leave at the moment, but also contributed to the report. We're hopeful that it provides you with sufficient information to make your decision today in terms of how we've covered off some of the scale and complexity the growth work that we're working on, including some comparative analysis of other areas across the country and other projects that you'll be familiar with in the region. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. So we've got the 2 recommendations in front of us, councillors. Any questions of the officers? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Sorry, just got a technology problem. So I just had a question around the amount of budget that we've been using for planning over the last few years. And it seemed to me as though the budget that we've got planned for next year is only about a third of what we spent in 2021. 21-22. Is that right?
That is correct, and that's because there was some funding transferred, which is to support that work during the course of those years, which is detailed in the reports.
So over the last couple of years, we've been, I guess, topping up the budget from other funds, and that's enabled us to sort of stagger on.
Correct.
But there's no prospect of doing that for the coming year.
Yeah, I think it's not a sustainable or good practice way of managing a budget.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Just further to that, David, is the work lumpy though? Does it come and go?
That is something we reflected on in preparing this report, and Michael and I and Jono chatted about it. And I think one of the things we've reflected on as a collective team is, you know, the budget that we have in year 3, which is the 6, 7, 8, 900, is effectively the core budget the planning team has had for the best part of a decade. And you'll recall we completed a sectional district plan review from about 2010 to about 2019-20. Really the approach with that piece of work over that long period of time was to drive the project as quickly as we could with the resources we had available. And I guess what we didn't do sufficiently at the end of that sectional review in terms of preparing the budget for this LTP is look at what the work that was then needing to be addressed and I guess reassess that in terms of the scale and complexity relative to the work that we completed on the sectional district plan review. So I guess what I'm saying in short is the planning projects we're now dealing with are substantially different to the ones we dealt with through the course of the sectional district plan review. So during the sectional district plan review, we were dealing with a lot of functional planning things that affect the day-to-day operation of the city. As you'll see, the work program now is heavily dominated by urban growth-related projects, which are more significant and more complex than, say, reviewing the Acacia Birch Zone provisions or the hazardous substance rules or the noise rules or the signs rules, where we did all those through the sectional review with the budget we had and went at the pace we could to stay within budget, but effectively we didn't sufficiently look at the cost of actually these growth pieces of work. And sorry, just one last thing, I know that's a relatively long answer, but certainly looking forward to the next LTP, what we anticipate doing is, because this report will get us through, assuming there's some additional budget allocated, will get us through year 3. But what we're looking at doing in the next LTP is having dedicated budgets for those specific large growth programs and then retaining the core planning budget for those other types of things that we talked about.
Thank you, David. That explains it well. Look, just need to let you know we will have a fire drill at 9:25 a.m. It is just a test of the alarms. You don't have to worry. You don't have to evacuate. But just if it goes off, you'll know what's happening. Okay, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thank you both for the report. My question relates to the second recommendation, which outlines that the 491,000 could be reduced if council was willing to accept risks and lost opportunities associated with deferring work on one or a combination of the other planned changes or projects. In considering this, was there any thought given to, instead of offsetting some of those costs with other planning work, whether there was any other opportunity within the organisation or work that was perhaps less urgent or less important to offset this cost?
Yes and no. What the report does is all of those other plan changes or projects are statutory requirements of council. So I guess what we're saying is there is an obligation or for all of those those pieces of work to happen. There are obviously some risks and costs with deferring those, or risks probably more than costs of deferring those. But we did that. That recommendation 2 did provide. We were conscious of the size of the budget request. So recommendation 2 does provide. Yeah, it does provide the council with some opportunity to defer those pieces of work. They would still need to be completed, but I think the key thing is they are directions from the government or requirements within the RMA that we do need to complete.
Thank you, and I understand the importance of those programs, which is partly what I'm trying to ask, is if we do want to include all of the programs costing 491,000, essentially I'm expecting that would put an extra 0.5% on the rates or thereabouts. Is there anything outside of the planning area, perhaps this is for the Chief Executive, perhaps, is there anything outside of the planning area that could help offset this additional cost if we were to approve the full amount?
Through the Mayor, I think in the initial deliberations that we had around the annual plan is that we tried to get the budget down to as low as what we possibly could for this particular time around. The choice is yours about whether or not you're wanting to add things additionally into the budget. We haven't considered in this particular instance anything else that could offset this amount.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps just one further question, if that's all right, Mr. Mayor. So this recommendation is just referring this budget to the annual plan deliberations, which is the next item. So are we just deferring it to the next item, or are we making a decision now?
We need to make a decision on this now because do we? Okay. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I got that wrong. We are deferring it.
Yep. So
we'll accept the report.
Yep.
But then it'll be the first item that we talk about.
Thank you. That's good to clarify. Thank you.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick question for you both. Looking at paragraph 4.9, excuse me, on page 29, talking about the national planning standards and e-planning, just curious about your comment there that the new planning regime and legislative change that's going to take place might render this work academic. I'm wondering what level of transferability work on the national planning standards and the district plan is transferable to the new iteration of that under the new legislation?
Through the Mayor, it's a difficult question to answer because the detail of the legislation around that isn't clear yet. What MFE have advised is that there will be some overlaps between the national planning standards and the new formatting of the regional plans that will be developed under the new legislation. There may be some benefit in setting up the district plan to more readily transfer into it. However, that work will need to be done, and there's some uncertainty about the level of transferability at this stage.
Thank you. And does that sort of hold for further down? We talked about the future development strategy and the outcome of that being a regional natural built and environment plan. Is that the same sort of thing with doing this work that may be able to overlap with the changes once they're implemented?
The future development strategy work that's within the existing RMA is expected to be replaced by the Spatial Planning Act. So the outputs that would be developed under the future development strategy would transfer into that new system, or there would be there'd be an alignment there. The difference being that I guess the future development strategy for Palmerston North that's currently under development would be, I guess, a sub-regional component of a wider regional spatial plan that would be developed, because the new system is going to be a regional-based system rather than a city-based system.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, David and Michael. Interested in how the estimates of resource requirements were arrived at. Is there a contingency in there? Is there expectation around how was that arrived at?
Through the Mayor, the way that we calculated the forecasted costs was based on our experience with plan changes to date, and in particular recent growth plan changes that we've been working on. So we've got rough estimates around the particular areas of expertise that need to inform district plan changes, and that was the basis. They've been as informed as they can be based on forecasting from what we've seen in recent times.
Thank you. My second question and final is, if this were to ultimately go ahead, to what extent, if any, would this be building capacity within the organization, or would this be really just money flowing out to consultants?
A lot of the urban growth projects are already well underway. So there are a number of technical experts that have been commissioned to provide external advice and support to the planning function. Many of the plan changes under development are able to be led out, at least the planning capacity, from the city planning team. There are some consultants on some of the projects, and that's been a necessity to manage the extent of the work program. It's quite a large work program, and it won't be able to be fully delivered with internal resources, but there'll be a mix.
And in that mix, could you put an estimate? Is it a 50-50 mix? Is it a 90-10 mix?
Because of the scale of the projects and the technical inputs required, a lot of the technical inputs will have to be provided by external consultants. That expertise doesn't sit within the organisation. Think of things like noise experts, ecologists, geotechnical advice, and to some extent, as referred to in the report, some of the traditional functions of council that would have in the past been delivered by council officers in the sort of the transport and three water spaces. That there hasn't been internal capacity to support the extent of the urban growth program over the last couple of years in particular. And so that has been outsourced, and given that work's underway, would continue to need to be outsourced.
If I could just add briefly to that, I think where there is an overlap between any external consultant and internal expertise that we have, we are certainly making sure that those internal experts are having the opportunities to work alongside the external consultants, or ultimately review or be part of that work, so that A, they're learning, but also taking, I guess ensuring that they're comfortable with the recommendations that are coming through from those external consultants, where we have the equivalent expertise in-house, so that, because ultimately these are, in a lot of cases, assets and things like that we end up taking on. So,
thank you both, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Michael and David, for the report. The question that I have is just around the amount in dollars and time and resource that the planning team spends on taking a piece of land into the rezoning regime. Knowing what we know now about Whakarongo and Kiki Whenua, would the planning team still have moved forward with that rezoning?
The short answer would be yes, because we need to ensure that there's sufficient land supply to meet projected demand, and so those areas have long been identified as growth options for the city, and the sectional district plan review is part of that, with both Whakarongo and Kiki Whenua, or Kiki Whenua to a lesser extent. we've brought forward to give effect to council urban growth planning that's been well settled for the best part of probably 2 decades.
Sure, just a follow-up question, Mr Mayor. So in that regard, knowing that we had infrastructure challenges with whakarongo, they're driven by council, yes or no? And with Waka Kotahi, obviously not driven by council for Kiki Whenua.
Yeah, sorry, to answer your question around, I guess, the infrastructure issues that have become more apparent in recent times, the requirements of the RMA have probably evolved a little bit since those plan changes were developed. So there's quite a high level of technical information that's required to get through the RMA rezoning process now.
Yep.
Fair to say for whakarongo, at the plan change level, we didn't have the level of understanding that we have now around the stormwater issues in that area, and there was a decision of council, I think late last year, to provide budget to purchase that land to enable the stormwater detention pond to be constructed.
Yep.
It wasn't understood what the level of stormwater requirements would be for whakarongo until the Tamakuku subdivision consent was lodged, and that raised a whole lot of issues that weren't canvassed through the plan change process. And similar with Kiki Whenua, there was an understanding about the issues with the intersection treatment at Te Wanaka Road and State Highway 56.
Yep.
And there were some plans put in place for council to assist with funding to enable that intersection to be funded and upgraded. We did know about the need to service infrastructure there. The issue in that case is that some of our capital growth programs haven't been delivered, and we're at a point now where there's a subdivision triggering the need for those works to come, and then needing to negotiate with Waka Kotahi to get the speed reduced to allow the intersection treatment. So there's some difficulties there in terms of aligning land use planning and infrastructure delivery to enable growth.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Good, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. That's the questions done. So look, we're going to look to move to accept this these resolutions that council refer the additional budget of $491,000 for accelerating urban growth work to deliberations in a moment of the 23-24 annual plan, and number 2, that council note additional budget of $491,000 in the 23-24 could be reduced if council is willing to accept the risks and lost opportunities associated with deferring work on one or a combination of other plan changes or projects listed in table 3 of the memorandum. I've moved that, second by the Deputy Mayor. I'm not going to speak too much because we're going to debate it in a moment, but I'll open it up for any others that want to comment. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm just going to keep the comments to the issue of referring it to the annual budget debate. And I just wanted to remind councillors that this whole report came about because we had repeated KPI red lights on the amount of land that were rezoned in the quarterly performance report. And through those committee meetings and through meetings of the hearings group, we've asked a lot of questions about why it is that we're not able to meet that KPI, to have the amount of land rezoned that we should have. And ultimately, it's come down to resourcing. And so this is why this report is here now. It's as a result of questions that elected members have been asking over the last few months, and as a result of the reporting, the regular reporting that we get through the quarterly performance report. So just to understand maybe why it's come now, and to understand, where it's come from and what it's trying to change. So just thought I'd put that context in. Thank you.
Okay. Look, just agree with Councillor Johnson. I mean, there has been some, I suppose, red flags for bringing this forward. We'll debate it in a moment, but just want to acknowledge the officers in making quite a clear report to understand where the big sum goes and breaking it down. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to understand where 1.7 million goes, or even 678,000. And I think it was outlined pretty clearly that even the Hamilton cities and the Taurongers do need to get externals as well. No council that I know of our size, or even a little bit larger, would hold geotech noise noise officers that would be able to, even in an environmental sense, would be able to do that sort of work. So you do need a mix of externals, and I think it's always quite good to check, your processes and planning processes. Interesting around the core planning funding and then the dedicated budgets for larger projects. But I think it's a combination too of not only having some resource, but also having willing developers that are going to do this work as well. As I've said for a long time, town is run by half a dozen developers, and whether they turn the tap on or they don't turn the tap on, we suffer as a city. So competition's really healthy, and I hope that by able to do some more work, that we might be able to open that closely controlled chest a little bit wider. Also, you need partners, infrastructure partners, and we've been found in the past that we quite often haven't had our utilities partners with us or our roading partners. And so, I'll leave the rest to the next debate, but if you can support this to go to the next stage, that'd be good. Right, we'll vote, please. And it's passed 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Okay, we move now to the main order of business, and that is number 8. It's on page 43 of your documents. I invite it's around our annual plan deliberations. And before we get into the individual pieces, we'll just have a general overview of where we're at, so everyone totally understands that. And I invite Cameron Mackay, our Chief Financial Officer, and Steve Patterson, our Strategy Finance Manager. Gentlemen.
Good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. This is really just an overview presentation of what is to come in terms of deliberations of the budget, but we thought it might be useful just to give a bit of a summary before we go through into that process. If there's questions, do sing out. So really today we've been through the hearings, been through our consultation process, and today is about making really the decisions from our draft budget process into finalising what our annual budget is to look like, and that will come back to you for adoption in June. So, as you're aware, we've been out for public consultation. We've gone through a fairly robust hearings process, and those submissions that we have received have been attached to the reports that you have in front of you. Attachments 1 to 3 really outline the engagement and submissions that we received back as part of the consultation process. Specifically, in attachment 3, we have tried where we can to put some officer comments to submissions to help with today's deliberations. Just a reminder, whenever we go through a budgeting process, there are some key financial assumptions that we make. I would assume that people would be aware of the interest rate environment does continue to increase. However, we've looked at our own assumptions that we've made for the annual budget, and given that we do have a level of hedging in place or fixing through swaps, we are comfortable to leave our interest rate assumption as it is. there is always a risk. There is always a risk in this environment that interest rates continue to go up and exceed those assumptions. Again, those swaps are in place to try and minimise those risks, and if that continues to do so, we would be reporting that back to you through the quarterly report. But we don't see a need at this point to adjust those assumptions. Inflation, we all know sort of where we are in terms of inflation. We don't propose any change. We still run off our BEL assumptions, but it's just acknowledging that the headline inflation is still relatively high at the moment, for which the increased interest rates is trying to.
Sorry, Cameron, I might just interrupt you because I can see there's a few slides, and rather than we've got some questions at different times, so it is a bit messy, but I think it'll keep people on track. Otherwise, some people might forget about what their question was in 10 minutes' time. So, Councillor Johnson, you had a question.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Cameron. I just wondered what our average interest rate percent is.
Yes, good morning, councillors. At the moment, our interest rate average is round about that level that we've got in the budget, reasonably close, in terms of the average hedged rate. If we're borrowing new funds, like I did yesterday, for 3-year money, we're paying about 5.25 sort of level. Short-term rates are over 6% at the moment. We've got roughly half of our debt hedged, so I guess the risk arises from the extent to which we raise the full amount that we're planning to raise to fund things during the year, and we've made some assumptions about that as well.
What I'm interested in is that we've proposed an assumption of 4.2%, and I understand that we've got proportion hedged and that new debt has to be raised at the current rate, whatever we can get in today's rate. But I'm interested to know if you take a global view, is the average rate around 4.2%, or are we up higher than that, or are we lower than that? I understand that new debt will be more than that. I totally understand that, but we've got some hedged.
At the moment, our average, weighted average rate is around about this assumption level that we've made.
4.2?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And where the comment is that there's a significant risk that services may not be able to be delivered within budget, is that highly probable, or is that highly impactful if it happens? Do you see what I mean? Or is it both?
I'd probably say that it's impactful if inflation keeps trajectorying upwards, and we'd report that back to you through the quarterly reporting process. I don't see it necessarily with the budgets that we have in the draft. I don't see it necessarily being an issue at this point in time. It's just to say that if inflation keeps going up, then some of our costs that we receive, we are in a position where that gets passed on to us, and then we could have a problem. But I'm not saying that we do have one at this point.
Okay. But inflation has actually started to come down, has it not?
Starting to come down, yes. And we would hope that continues.
Okay, thank you.
Continue on, yeah.
Okay, so this slide here, and you'll see in your report, section 2.2.1, we have a few proposed changes to operating budgets to make as a result of some changed circumstances. Probably the major one on there that I want to touch upon is insurance. When you take all the rest of them through, and the reduction in rates of one of the items, it's the insurance that's really left over. That's the main issue. So a couple of things have happened there. We did actually make an increased budget provision for insurance in the draft. That was one of the things that we did put in. But at the same time, we also undertook a revaluation for insurance purposes, which we do periodically to ensure that we are covering our assets for the right value for insurance, for replacement. And the insurance market itself, if you think of Cyclone Gabrielle and other things, that's impacting us, is pushing premiums higher. So initially, that figure of 400,000 was higher, but through discussions with our insurance providers, we've managed to accept a little bit more risk in terms of an overall loss limit, which seems reasonable, and being able to bring that increase down to that. There is an alternative to that increase on rates, and that is to bring that back within the budget provision. We would need to change to indemnity cover across our asset portfolio. That's risky, and why I say that is risky is because say we have a total loss of a building that's fully covered currently. If we go to indemnity, they'll only pay out a portion of the value, and so that means that you rely upon, in our case, without having reserves, we'd be relying upon debt, unforecasted debt increases to fund any major loss like that. And so certainly our advice would be that we do need to maintain full replacement cover.
Just before you go on, Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Cam. Just one question on insurance. Because we're landlocked, surely the insurance would be a different conversation than it would be with others that aren't landlocked. So how does that conversation go compared to those that are on the coast?
The risks for our council, well, there's 2 or 3 different types of insurance we're talking about. One is related to things like our underground infrastructure, and that underground infrastructure, we've got I think a pretty good arrangement in place that's consistent with what others do, but it takes account of the nature of the city, and I guess one of the biggest risks seen in this area is that we're lumped in a little bit with Wellington in terms of earthquakes. So earthquakes seen as the most significant risk, and the cost of earthquake cover is a very significant portion of what those premiums are about. In terms of buildings, well, the fact that we're not near the coast really doesn't change the risk to buildings from earthquakes or fire or whatever, but only, I guess, the sea. And so from that perspective, there is a separate discussion, as you say. They look at our particular situation, but even then, there are a number of things that apply right across the sector.
Okay, Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Cam and Steve. I just picked up on your indemnity versus full replacement, Cam. Any examples that council have had to suffer a total loss on a building in Palmerston North that you're aware of?
No, we haven't had a total loss on any buildings as the council.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you. Just wanted to ask if, as a consequence of what we've seen around the rest of the country, have we looked at whether or not the amount we have for flood cover is adequate? Or do we have specific, or is that just wrapped up into our general building cover?
There isn't specific flood cover, it's just wrapped up into the overall picture.
Carry on.
Just a couple of other areas just to highlight. In terms of where we're not proposing change to the draft budget, we've been in discussions with CLM around additional funding support for the pools, and they've signalled that they've got about a 66,000 shortfall. The recommendation is, and it's in the report, to increase the fees and charges maximum that they can charge as a way of not further increasing the grant that they would pay, and so that's an option that we're putting forward. If you recall, when we had the fees and charges discussion, council decided to reduce the recommended bag fee price, and at the time we said we would come back with what impact that might have. So that impact is based on our assumptions around demand and usage is likely to be around 200,000. We don't propose to increase the budget by that amount at this time. We would rather try and live within our total budget that we're putting forward, and if we do encounter any sort of issues, we would be able to report this back to you through the quarterly reporting process. But we think that we would rather try and absorb that rather than ask for more. The important area for us at the moment, particularly out of what you've just heard, is funding our insurance premiums. That's where we see the main problem. In terms of changes to operating programs, so attachment 5 outlines the operating programs and changes to them. There is no rating impact from the changes that are outlined there. They are broadly two things. One being the better off funded program. So initially we had a placeholder that just was sitting in the capital program, but some of these are actually operational because they're investigations and the like. So we've reflected the correct treatment of them now that we've had a chance to break them down appropriately. So they're outlined in attachment 5. And we have two operating programs which are loan funded, and in the current year they are looking to potentially carry over some funds. They are digital transformation and the ERP system programs. Really, the bulk of that carry forward relates to more when we're incurring the spending, so when some of the milestone payments are coming due, as opposed to not being required or work not happening in those spaces. The capital program, so as you can see, the capital program that we have before you today is relatively in line with what we had in the draft budget process. There has been individual changes to programs that are outlined in attachments 6 and 7, and have been updated for what we believe the carry forward position will be. And is reflective of the latest information. So we're conscious to put a deliverability lens across this and not increase the total size of the program to ensure that what we do put forward, we have a better chance to deliver. And so that's the lens that's been taken in terms of getting us to the position that we're in for these deliberations. This slide is really just to give a bit of a brief overview and really to answer a bit of a question around where we are forecasted to land at the end of the current year, where we've mentioned between 65 and 70 million of the current year program being delivered, and carry forwards of a magnitude of around, I think they're around about $20 million that left a gap. So what you can see is that there are a number of items that are being proposed to go through to the long-term plan, as opposed to adding to the carry forward bucket, and a lot of that is based on having something that's realistic to deliver, and where we're at in terms of our overall program.
Sorry, we just stopped there. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Steve, and yeah, thank you both. Look, just a question, just going back to the deliverability of CapEx and cap renewal. Can you give us some understanding of how that the deliverability has actually been stress tested and tested to ensure that we've got that number right?
Bryce Hosking, Acting Chief Infrastructure Officer. I'm probably better placed to answer that. Quite simply, we have gone through every single program line by line and rigged it probably harder than, well, I've been here 6.5 years. This is probably the most riggering I think we've done in that 6.5 years. Absolutely everything. If we think there's, what are the risks? What are they? How can we mitigate them? If we can't, or we think there's actually a risk of deliverability, we've simply deferred it out. So the program that's in front of you are all things that officers believe we can deliver.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hapera.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Cam. When it says lack of internal resources, what is that referring to?
Probably me again. Yeah, well, we've got some key vacancies in the unit, and some of this work is directly tied to some of those kind of things. So, again, when we were looking at deliverability, we were considering everything from internal resourcing to contractor availability. And for some key roles that are proving quite difficult to try and hire, in some cases we've made the decision to defer some projects to make it realistic.
Can we be a bit more specific? Because that's very vague. It doesn't actually tell us anything.
For instance, we currently have a number of vacancies in the transport space, some key traffic engineers and the likes. And so the transport capital program this year has been basically, when we were looking to bring it to the draft stage, we've rigged that accordingly, and we've made calls where officers thought perhaps there could be some strains, or where we thought maybe some of those contractors simply there would not be capacity to deliver things.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a question around deferral of land purchases to the LTP. Are any of those land purchases around shared pathways?
Just thinking of what's included in there, no, I don't believe so. So, for instance, one of the programs in there was a program to be purchasing a property that's next to Arena that we've been unable to, well, negotiations are still ongoing, things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Cam. Just that right-hand column deferred to LTP in that slide. Is that consistent with what was out in draft, or has there been movement between draft and today?
My understanding is that whilst there were some items deferred to LTP in the draft, this has been updated to reflect the current position, so there's probably likely to have been some things added here, but if I'm incorrect, Bryce can.
Nothing added, so it's consistent in that respect, but as Cam rightfully said, we have gone through and updated the figures, and in some cases, like for instance around the wastewater treatment plant, what we were forecasting to spend next year, we've now deferred more of that to reflect the delays.
Thank you. So that's same categories but different quantum?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Carry on.
One of the areas that we need to get through this meeting is the council has referred to their annual budget deliberations process a number of items for consideration. So These are outlined to you in attachment 4, and really that is what we're going to be going through later on today. In terms of the rates requirement, we currently still we still sit at the 6.4% mark, and it's just a bit of a reminder as to what 1% of rates represents, because that's sometimes useful to have in the back of our minds. So roughly 1.15 million of an increase in operating costs represents a 1% increase in total rates. I'll lead into this, but Steve will share this. So if you recall, in the draft budget process, there was a request for us to consider the level of the UAGC and what impact that would have. We have done this, and we bring this back for your information and consideration. If I think back to the hearings and where we did have a high land value property come in and talk to us about the land value, capital value discussion, any reductions in UAGC from this point for someone with that sort of land value actually has quite a significant impact of an increase to their rates. Because the land value is higher than the average. So once we start moving with these levers, we end up, whilst we might solve one issue, we possibly will create an issue somewhere else. So it's just being aware of those consequences. Anything you'd like to add, Steve?
Not a great deal, really. I think I was just asked to bring this comparative information back. I guess from my perspective, it is always a tricky issue as to what's the right balance. And as Cam said, the risk is sometimes if you make a call to make a change somewhere, there are some unintended consequences elsewhere. There's no doubt that the Uniform Annual General Charge is a mechanism for moderating the rates across the extremes of value. But as I've mentioned in the slide here, it does have the effect, though, as well, because of the number of properties there are in each category of influencing the total that will be paid within a particular category. So the lower the UAGC, the less that will fall on the single unit residential group, the more that will fall on the commercial industrial group proportionately, and the more that will fall on the multi-unit residential group. And as Cam said, those with a very high land value, even higher than those ones listed in those examples there, are the ones that would get an even higher increase than they've been coming to you about through the consultation process. I guess those are the risks, and as well, from my perspective, a significantly lower UAGC would lead to rates in the rural area, which in some cases would be reduced from where they are now. And my personal view is that they're not, that would make them too low, in a sense, in terms of being reasonable and appropriate. And I think that's probably all I need to say at the moment.
Got a number of questions, if we could just hold here. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Apologies, my question actually relates to the capital program. I'm a little bit late to be asking this, but just reflecting on the answers that were given by officers in terms of the confidence that was expressed in the deliverability of the capital program, 65 million of capital new. I'm just looking at our most recent update at the end of April. We had delivered 26 million capital new of a $62 million program for this year. So I guess what my question is in what way are we so confident that we can deliver 65 million next year when it looks like we're possibly going to deliver a bit over 50 to somewhere between 50 to 60% this year? Do we have the resource and the capacity to deliver that, given what our current track record is?
Bryce Hosking, Acting Chief Infrastructure Officer. Well, your question was sort of several-fold, I suppose. Look, in terms of confidence, I mean, as I said earlier, and I can say it again, we have gone through every single program. In some cases, there were, programs have multiple projects, and we've deferred some projects but retained others. And we have really gone to the nth degree to be confident and be able to stand here today and say we believe we can make the step change from what we've delivered this year to deliver what's currently in the annual budget next year. And that's probably the best answer I can give you, really. Because simply if we didn't think we could deliver it, or we thought there were going to be some constraints in the market, we simply deferred it, basically. So we've gone through that process. There has been some large things as well that are no longer there. So, for instance, next year, seismic buildings, for instance, council has made the decision to defer that. That was the best part of $10 million in next year's program. So that's a good example as well of a lot of capital new that's no longer there. And a lot of the capital programs, especially the big ones that are underway at the moment, are actually underway. So if you look at things like, just to pick a couple from my space, the animal shelter is well underway. The Papioia Place will be complete early next year. The crematorium seismic strengthening is halfway through. So there's a lot of that stuff that's already underway that, from our point of view, it completely de-risks a large portion of the program, because we essentially have 10, 15 programs that are making up a large amount of the overall budget next year.
Thank you. So is that enough to step it up by 70 to 80% in 1 year?
I mean, essentially if we say that we're going to be delivering 70 million this year, we're basically saying we want to deliver $90 million next year. So it's a $20 million step change from what we've done this year. And yeah, we've been putting a huge focus in the last few months in particular on setting ourselves up for success. So our planning for the projects are well underway. We've really stepped that up, and we're starting to make sure that come July 1st, we're actually able to hit the road running, rather than sort of completing some of that planning stuff, which may have happened in previous years.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Cameron and Steve. Steve, in your comments about the UAGC, you said that the UAGC moderates rates against extremes of value. How does it moderate rates at the lower end? Is it not only at the higher end that it moderates?
Well, I guess it depends how you interpret the word moderate. Moderate in my mind means either for those that are very, very low in terms of land value, but perhaps could have a significant house on it, for example, where the very low rates would mean they'd not be paying what was seen to be enough. Whereas at the top end, they're moderating them to the extent that it's reducing them somewhat from what they would otherwise be. So I personally see it as both ends of the spectrum.
Okay, so in simple terms, the UAGC means that people with low value properties pay more and people with high value properties pay less.
Low land value properties, yes, and high land value, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Continue.
So really that was the final thing that we wanted to discuss, and really it's just a reminder of where we are in the process. We do have a couple of times to come back again, but what we're trying to suggest is that if we can get some good decisions out of this deliberations process over today and tomorrow. What we would be trying to do, if we could, is to come back on the 14th of June with a draft budget to adopt. In years gone by, that has been a committee of council meeting, I believe. This time around, it's actually the full council meeting. So that's what we're aiming towards, is to try and get to an adoption on the 14th of June, and that also just takes a little bit of the pressure off the end of year, sort of, we were going through some system change. But that date is there if it is needed.
Thanks, Cam. Steve, just one final question. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and apologies for needing to step back a little bit. The capital program slide 10, that list on the right-hand side, did have a question around the changes in terms of shared paths and possibly land purchases there. Is there anything in those changed figures that influences either the timing or the pace of the notice of requirement around the Ashurst shared path?
I will ask Bryce if he can provide an update on that.
No, I don't believe so. As I said, there was that figure's made up from a couple of strategic purchases, like the one next to Arena, for instance, as opposed to that work by the Ashurst path.
Thanks. So to be clear then, this budget that we're considering today wouldn't see any change in timing to what was signaled in the last quarterly reports? Getting some nonverbal communication from different parts of the room.
That's correct. No change.
Great, thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Councillor Johnson.
It was just a question to you, Mr. Mayor. I have got a few questions about specific programmes relating to recommendations that are proposed further on, and questions on the substantial report in item 8. When are we asking those? Are we asking those now, or are we doing those as each item comes up?
We're going to go through each, as you've emailed to us. We're going to go through each of them individually, and we can go through. And we have a substantive couple of motions. Are you asking questions of officers?
Yes. Yeah, I've got some questions
on the substantive.
Well, I've got questions about well, I'll just be clear. I've got questions about Nuvaka, I've got questions about St Mark's Highbury, Bilber Brown Park, and I've got questions around concerns around library renewals that have been reduced, and I've got questions around services and programmes not being able to be delivered. So when shall I ask those?
I think when we get to each section, I mean, a number of those are individual motions, and questions around the substantive. We've pulled back on standing orders, so we can bring, if it's deemed reasonable, we can bring questions in from the officers.
Okay. Well, I've just got one more general question then about the
it.
finances. So there's quite a number of parts in the report in which there are statements such as services and programmes may not be able to be delivered, draft budget will not be sufficient, etc. And I'm just wondering if we can have some comment, either from the CFO or the CE, around the sufficiency of the budget as proposed to be able to deliver the programmes and services as outlined.
Yes, through the Mayor. What we've presented is a budget that did have some reductions and things made to it from the first round of deliberations, I guess you can call them, with the elected members. What we've tried to do here, and as Cam and Steve have outlined, there are some instances where We've proposed fees and charges, and some of those things have been reduced, like the rubbish bag ones, I guess we could use as an example. But what we've tried to do is then present a budget back to you that still looks to live within the means of what we originally proposed and what we went out to consult with the community on. So we are looking to manage service levels and maintain those as they are currently at. There may be some bumps as we go through the course of the year through what might happen around inflation and interest rates and those sorts of things. We'll report those back to you at the quarterly reports, if not sooner, if need be as well, if we're finding it difficult to maintain service levels at certain points in time. So I think we all realise that it's a tough year, this one, but we are trying to make sure that we manage ourselves with what we have in front of us at the moment, if that helps.
So with the current budget, you don't, and if nothing changes in terms of inflation, interest rates, etc., you don't envisage making any service cuts?
That's correct. There is no plan to make any of those. If we were looking at having to, make service cuts and those sorts of things, then that's a report that comes back to you to make a decision around those things. I guess the team are just highlighting the fact that there are still a few unknowns this year around, the drivers that are driving this budget, inflation and interest rates, and what we're trying to do is just manage within those, but they're just highlighting that there is some risks throughout the year that are unforeseen for us currently at the moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I also have a few high-level questions around the financials that aren't related to specific programs. The first one is, in the March presentation, we had a high-level summary of the three main components of MSL 104 million, program 16 million, and then the capital program impact of 2.7 million, and at that point that added up to 123.9 million. Obviously, with the changes made in March, I'm just wondering, do we have an update on those figures and how they might have changed since March, because resulting in the changes that were made in March?
What was published, well, what we have at the moment, I guess, is the underlying picture is more or less the figures that were consulted on in March through that consultation process, and so we've not made any overall change in terms of the starting point for today from that at the moment. So whatever you choose to do today in terms of the stuff that's being suggested and recommended and the things that you're considering of your own are the things that will influence what that final picture looks like.
I guess what I'm saying is that those figures weren't updated. We haven't had that high-level summary since the changes that were made in March to understand. So we had $1 million come off MSL, for example. Yeah, anyway, perhaps I'll move on if that isn't available right now.
We don't have that available today, no.
We don't have that available. Okay, so I guess part of why I'm asking that question is that just moving to page 46, 46 in the agenda, at the bottom of that page, it talks about the impact of capital program on rates, and it talks about a 1.07 million impact for interest and an additional 0.76 million for operating costs, which adds up to 1.8 million impact of capital program on rates. However, in March, before we made changes, the capital program impact was 2.7 million, and I'm aware that 400,000 was reduced in terms of the operational impact of the capital programs as a part of that 1 million the schedule that included 1 million of reductions. But there's a 0.9 million between, difference between those two figures, and I'm really trying to understand what that other $500,000 is made of. Am I making sense with my question? So in March, the capital program impact was said to be 2.7 million, which made up, a significant amount of the increase in rates. And now this paper is saying that it's 1.8 million, and which is 0.9 difference.
I can't give you the breakdown of the difference between what we shared with you as that detail at that time and what we're now saying here. I know when I looked to write the figures in this report for you today, we went back to our model that we have of the programs that are sitting in the system at the moment, and looked at the way in which the rating impact is shown, the operating costs, and so that's how I've arrived at the figures that are shown in that today. I haven't gone back and double-checked against what...
So, Councillor, there was some answers given to all councillors on Friday.
Yep.
I understand it's
Yep.
in those.
That's exactly the same as what's written in the report on the bottom of page 46.
Yes, although I do have some working papers with me, they don't compare back to what we said back in March, so I don't have the information to be able to do that.
Is there any other questions?
Yeah, a couple more. The next one is also on the page, the same page 46 at the top, and the first line says 10.1 million is to be delivered by the in-house workforce. I'm presuming the in-house workforce is the same as capitalised labour, is it? It's just that the capitalised labour
we've got
told was
we've got infrastructure to.
I might to be able to give some clarity to that. So in-house workforce is things like our operational crews at the depot and the likes. So our civil construction teams, so they're actually going to be delivering 10 million odd of the program next year. Capitalised labour is much more broader and includes anyone working on a capital project.
Okay, so in March, we were told that the capitalised labour was 8.8 million. Does that remain the same?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is the assumption that we make in terms of how much we're going to transfer into capitalised labour. We are somewhat, I guess, try to be conservative a bit with that figure, because what we don't want to have is that we do have, say we deliver 80% of the program, but we've then not funded some elements of our labour force. So we do apply a little bit of that thinking so that we don't underfund ourselves. So 8.8 million, I don't think we have made any material changes to that assumption in terms of the capitalised labour assumption that we make in terms of funding our salary budget.
Okay, thank you. And just one final question. The 6.4% increase in rates increase that we consulted on, with the operational changes that have been included in 2.2.1 of around 413. So can we have an update? Does that put us up to 6.8 as a starting point, or is it less than that?
Moment. We'll come back and tell you that.
Oh, thank you. That's all from me.
Councillor Wood, hopefully the last question.
Sorry, just one quick question from my understanding, and it might just be as a new councillor, I don't entirely understand the terminology. I've seen it throughout the report that we've got a rates limit of, I believe it was 7.2% based on our figures. What happens if we go above that? Is it an actual limit, or is it just a preferable limit?
That is the limit that the financial strategy sets. Council can decide to exceed that limit, but it is a limit that we put into the financial strategy and consulted on as part of the 10-year plan, as where we thought. Right now, just as a as a further piece of information, in the long-term plan itself, we had actually planned to a rates increase of 8.3%. I believe we'd planned to exceed the limit in this year anyway, so council can choose to exceed those limits if it wishes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, councillors, it's timely. We will break now before we get into the into all the separate recommendations and additional recommendations. So we'll be back in the chamber at 10:02. Thank you. Kia ora tātou, welcome back. Right, councillors, we're going to move into the bigger part of today's meeting, and what we're going to do is do it in chunks. So the first part of that is around receiving the engagement summary, which is attachment 1, the summary of the submissions, which is attachment 2, and then officer comments to those various submissions, which is attachment 3. So if you've got any questions, and then, well, first of all, we'll do questions. If there's any questions to these, before I look to move it and have it seconded, we'll get through that process first, and then we'll go through the individual additional recommendations around operating budget changes, operating programs, etc. So we'll go to the question side of things first, of the officers, and then, as I said, we'll move in second, and we can get into some general comments, and then we'll get into the specifics of the additional ones. Okay, starting off first, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I just really wondered if there was an update from officers on the question that was asked earlier about the starting point for our rates increase with the inclusion.
Yes, just under 6.8.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, just to confirm, clarify that it would be if those things that are listed in 2.2.1 were added.
Okay, thank you. Understood. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I've just got some questions about, first of all, the St Mark's Hybrid Cultural Hub Pacifica Centre submissions. So all of those submissions were asking for extended facilities extended community facilities in more or less a similar part of town. And I wonder if officers could comment whether there would be any value in doing a sort of needs assessment stroke feasibility as one whole thing, because in the officer answers, they were kind of separated out as separate studies. And I'm just wondering, is there any saving, predominantly, or advantage to be had in making it a combined feasibility study for needs in that part of the community?
There is an additional operating program around feasibility studies for community space in Highbury, which was a large submission, and also the needs of Pacifica Hub as well. So that is already, there is, which I'm sure most would have seen on the additional recommendations, but you're talking a bit further than that.
Well, I'm just wondering if there's any value in combining an investigation of Pacifica Hybrid Cultural Hub and expanded Awapuni Library facilities in St Mark's as one piece of work. Are there synergies? Could there be some savings? Or are we looking at 150,000 for each of those pieces of work? Do you see what I mean?
I hope not, but anyway, we'll let the officers speak to that. The cost bit, I mean.
Yeah, Bryce Hosking, Acting Chief Infrastructure Officer. I probably won't be the only one who might contribute to this answer. But look, yes, there could be some efficiencies achieved if you're looking at a hub-type model, because essentially you could consider the needs of the multiple sort of users and centres and combine them together. From a $150,000 standpoint, I mean, that also includes some sort of initial sort of concept designs and things as well built into that. In terms of the St Mark's site specifically, I would suggest that that's probably a slightly different matter, because I think you could do a bit of work around actually combining them together and looking at a hub model, but it doesn't necessarily need to be at the St Mark's site. So I think there could be a split there in a logical sense, but I'm not sure if anyone else wants to build on that.
Thank you for the answer. and I may not have been clear in my questioning, I wasn't envisaging one building that would serve all needs. I was just wondering if the investigation of the needs and the feasibility could be combined.
Possibly three sites.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I guess the only thing I would add is I guess where there would be some, I think they are three distinct projects, but where we would gain some efficiencies is potentially using one provider rather than running three separate projects.
Okay.
Shall I continue? I've got other questions. I'll continue them. So I've just got some questions for staff around funding for New Vaca Trust. So there was a supplementary paper about that suggested that funding, that staff would assist New Vaca with applying for funding through the Community Initiatives Fund as the best route to provide funding. But would that Community Initiatives Fund provide baseline funding for back office functions and admin and staff salaries, or is that Community Initiatives Fund just available for the event side of the funding that they asked for?
I'll get one of the community team to speak to that.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Steph Alvin, Community Development Manager. Yes, through the Community-Led Initiatives Fund, we can also fund salaries and back office costs related to the project that's been considered.
Okay. Are you able to just give us a bit more a background as to why you think that that would be the best route for funding New Vaca at this stage? That particular fund, I mean. Is it because there's a fund available already, so we don't have to add additional budget?
Yes, so that fund is available all year round. There's a little bit remaining this financial, and then obviously we've got the budget for next financial there in the budget as it stands.
Okay. With that answer, Mr. Mayor, I haven't had a chance to liaise with my seconder yet, but I'll be inclined to withdraw the recommendations around New Vaca, because when I put those through, I hadn't yet had the supplementary paper come through. I don't know, Councillor Zabellin, if you're agreeable to that. Yeah. So we'll just withdraw those two then and accept staff advice on the best way to fund.
There actually is another.
Yeah, your one I think can still stand.
Yeah, because I think
there
does need to be a mechanism there.
Yeah. No, I think your one is a separate one, but I think, I'm sorry, I'm commenting, but anyway, but I feel like staff have explained that there's a fund and a mechanism available that they think will be suitable that would meet the needs for event funding and back office funding. So I don't see any need to add to the budget if that's the case, especially in the circumstances that we're in.
Okay, thank you. Lots of questions coming. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A short one, and I hope an easy one, Steve. This relates to the goal to new or increased requests for funding in the support for more art and theatre spaces, where there are a couple of comments about losing theatre space in the city. And I'd put a question through to officers about how that would best be addressed, and officers had come back signalling if work was required, there would be some additional resource required, but we've not been given a dollar amount for that. So I wondered if you could advise on the best way to advance getting an answer to that question.
Mr. Mayor, since then, the staff have advised us that something in the order of 30 to 40,000 would be the cost of the work that would be involved in doing that.
Is that a one-year programme
Yes.
to do that? Okay, thank you for that.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. The first question relates to the Globe Theatre Trust operating grant. When the CCO statements of intent came to committee recently, there was a little bit of an inconsistency where the request for Te Manawa hadn't been included in their financials, but the request from the Globe had been. And I just am wondering if that translates to what was also included in the annual budget, and whether, if the 50,000 for the Globe, whether that still needs to be a recommendation if elected members are wanting that included. because I thought that was already included, but if someone could clarify, that would be
It
useful.
does. I can answer that quite quickly because where there is a motion, an additional recommendation on the table.
I realise that, Mr Mayor, that's why I'm asking the question, because if what was presented at the committee is already in the annual budget, then the additional 50 was already, someone's shaking their head, but if someone could clarify, that would be useful, because it hadn't been included in Te Manawa, but it had already been included in the Globe's financials that came to the committee.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, it was included in the Globe's financials, but it wasn't included in Council's budget.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That clarifies that one. The next question I have relates to the 20,000 that it would cost to establish a food-wide food resilience and security policy. I'm just wondering if the intent for that is for that to be done in-house or outsourced.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the intent would be to get a contractor to undertake the, I guess, preliminary research and analysis around what the issues and opportunities are in that respect. So I just will remind Council, I think it was last term of Council actually, the memo that was provided on the advice for the food security policy said the first step in the policy making process is to determine whether a policy is required. I think there is still some work required to determine whether a policy is actually the best response to help resolve the community's aspirations in terms of food security. That said, a policy may be the answer. If the funding is provided, we would use that funding to help answer that question and provide advice back to the council. So I guess what I'm saying is we wouldn't take the $20,000 and go away and then come back and say you don't need a policy. We'd probably spend some of that money, look into the issue, and then come back with some options about whether it's a policy or it might actually be other ways in terms of resolving that issue that the community has brought to the table. So the answer to your question is we'd use contractors, but I just sort of take the opportunity to provide a bit more context about that piece of work.
Thank you for that additional information. So can I just clarify, would there be 20,000 required just to answer the question of whether or not we need a policy?
No, $20,000 would be sufficient. If we made a decision to prepare a policy, $20,000 would be sufficient. If we don't end up preparing a policy, we don't anticipate we would spend all of that $20,000.
Okay, and just further to that, given that Council had already given the direction to do this work, why is it not possible for that to be prioritised within the work programme, the policy work, in order to deliver that within the current resources?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the first thing is there wasn't a direction to do the work. I think there was a direction to refer the additional funding to the annual budget, and that was missed. So but I guess to answer your question though, is ultimately that the policy team have a backlog of work for the next 2 to 3 years. They're heavily involved at the moment in helping the LTP process those sorts of things, so it's just a staff capacity issue.
Okay, thank you. And just final question, there's a recommendation around getting a feasibility study to review the needs of Pacifica Hub and more community space hub in Highbury. I'm just wondering if the community facilities review gives includes this information, whether that would be a double up on what's already included in the community facilities review, or if not, what is needed in addition to what's in the community facilities review.
The community places work, I guess, provides the foundation. So we've done an overall needs assessment at a high level, and the next step of that, or one of the next steps of that, is to develop a framework for how we assess these requests. And what it doesn't do is go into those distinct projects or requests and look at those individually. So that would be the work that needs doing to progress any of those.
So the work that's already done, does that give us a framework for determining what's needed or what's not needed?
So the development of the framework is the next step.
Okay, so this request would be consistent with what's already been done? That's what I'm trying to understand. If we were to request a feasibility study to review the needs, would that be the next step, the logical next step in terms of the process, or would that be a double up or jumping ahead a step?
We possibly need a policy view on that.
Yeah, so I think the advice when Stacey was in the chamber a week or two ago was the work that's been undertaken on the framework for community facilities is intended to inform, or be complete to inform the next LTP. So I guess potentially doing feasibility studies in advance of that framework could be a touch premature.
Yep. Thank you for that. That's all from me.
Just on that topic, the Pacifica Trust, Papiaoa Pacifica Trust came to us with a request around moving one of the budgets that was already there around the car park and putting it into the building. Just having attended a thing last week there, I can see why they'd like to have that money better utilised. Was anything? What was officers' views on that?
Kathy Deaver-Todd, Group Manager, Parks and Logistics. The additional car parking is to resolve a localised traffic issue caused by sports at Bill Brown Park, not in relation to the Pacifica Centre. The Pacifica Centre would benefit from that additional car parking, but that doesn't address the problem we are looking to address through car parking.
So, I suppose my question really is, could it happen if the will of council was to move that budget for this particular need, could that happen?
You could. The design work for the car park has already been done, and it wouldn't address the localised traffic issue we have. So we've been working quite closely with our parking officers. That is an ongoing problem for them every Saturday.
During rugby season, yeah.
Yep, and in the summer, the events at Bill Brown Park include touch, and that's a big pressure on the sports fields as well.
So it would, if council decided that design work could sit there and be picked up another year, a later year?
Absolutely. The design work could be picked up at a later stage.
Good, thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you. Just on the same subject, I understand that the feasibility study has also got a design element in it, and it's going to cost $150,000 per study for the Pacifica hub and also the community space hub per one. Could someone comment on that, please?
I think as well there's probably an important distinction between expanding the current Pacifica Centre, which is sort of what we're talking about there, and doing a complete sort of investigation into hub and needs, and probably in a wider sense. So there's sort of probably slightly different issues.
No, well, the recommendation that we put forward was to do a feasibility to find out what the needs are, not do a design element, was to find out what the needs are first.
So that could be, so that 150,000 would include some high-level conceptual work to be done, so you could reduce that down. My figure is usually about 100,000 is usually my feasibility number that I use, so you could reduce that down, noting that you wouldn't get any design work at all, just the needs work.
So would this be outsourced or by a contractor, or would it be done internally?
I would likely say outsourced.
Okay. The question that Councillor Johnson asked about St Mark's, would that be able to be done by the same person for these three potential reviews?
Potentially. I guess where I see a distinction between the two is St Mark's is a opportunity in terms of a location, as opposed to necessarily the other work that is more around needs of a community or needs of a group. So I think there is a slight distinction there. Could they be done by the same elements? Could be. I think there'd be a property element that would need to be considered around the St Mark's group, which may be a different element. We might be able to pull that bit internally into my team.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. And Councillor Harper's questions really segue nicely into the question I was going to ask. And it's really just around, there seems to be quite a bit of pressure on sort of the community facilities requirements in the western side of the city through submissions that have actually come to us. And just in terms of the St Mark's opportunity, just in terms of the viability of actually including that to that community facilities work, just seeking some comment in terms of how that can actually be framed in terms of the future urban growth of the city. I'm thinking of Kiki Whenua, Kakatangiata, and the growth over there. So is this an opportunity that we really need to make sure that we examine appropriately? Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, certainly the community spaces work that Stacey Solomon completed and reported back a week or two back on the resourcing indicated that, you know, looking closely at growth locations, you know, in the past we probably have looked at the hard infrastructure, but there is a need to look at the soft infrastructure. So certainly any work that occurs in the western side of the city looking at community facilities would need to think about projected growth at Kiki Whenua and Kakatangiata. We know the Kiki Whenua site itself could potentially be a community facility in the future. So there would certainly need to be some integration across that urban growth work and any community facility planning in the western suburbs.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question's just broadly around submissions. What response is there from council to submitters when there is a submission that is seeking action that doesn't require a council resolution? Because there's quite a few things that come through around wanting a tree gone, wanting a tree added, wanting a sign moved, etc. Is there an actioned response to that, or is it more of just a written acknowledgement that comes through?
Sure, Mr Mayor, I'll answer that one. Yeah, we do take note of those particular ones where there is, I think, there's a few came through about the Bunnythorpe community and the like in that as well, submissions and things, and some of those things are service requests. We do look to pick those up and actually get those loaded and look to have them actioned within current operating budgets.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Sorry, I'm back onto Pacifica Centre Hybrid Cultural Hub, St Mark's. What I'm hearing is that staff think we need to spend time creating a framework for dealing with requests before we can process the requests that we've had from these three different groups through the annual budget process. And well, first of all, is that a correct assumption that I've made there, that that's what staff are talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I expected, but not what I wanted. So how, I guess this is going to be a kind of a comment, and it's fine if I'm told to be quiet, but it is frustrating as an elected member to sit here year after year hearing requests for community facilities, and thinking that you've set the train in motion by doing the community spaces and places audit, and then that comes back and now we need another thing. And in the meantime, we've got communities crying out for facilities. So how, please staff, tell us, how can we take some action on this
Well,
very real need in the
Councillor, I think we
community.
can take action. It's our decision. It isn't the officer's decision. We either accept their advice or we don't. And I'm as frustrated as you are.
Yeah.
And I've lived and breathed this for 9 years
Yeah.
of people wanting the same thing.
Yeah.
How many times has St Mark's been in here?
Well, I was just thinking
How many
about that.
times has the Pacifica been in here?
Yeah.
So I think we can make that decision.
All right, snaps to you, Mr Mayor.
Sorry, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I have one more question, but that's in the capital space. Are we taking questions on the capital and operator?
Yep.
Yep. So my question on page 234, it's about program 1133, which is the football field design. I'm presuming that's the turf. Now, that's 199, and there's a comment there that there's the risk, if the project doesn't proceed, that the cost of design phase will need to be converted to operational expenditure. My question is that given the process that has occurred in the last few months, whereby there needs some further discussion to determine location, etc., I guess my question is whether it is appropriate to be getting on with design work, especially if there's a risk if the funding isn't here within the next year of that having to be capitalised. I guess I'd like an officer comment about the timing of when this work perhaps should be funded to be done in the absence of some other decisions and conversations that are still needing to happen.
Kathy Deaver-Todd. The work that we need to do, following on from the council decisions, engagement with Massey University and look at a site that potentially might not be on our own land. That doesn't necessarily mean that the project won't turn into a capital project. So I think if we just put that one to one side for the moment. The risk we're highlighting here is that if it's, for some reason, we proceed to the stage where we say it's not feasible and we're not going to proceed with it, at that point, we would have to then say we're not building an asset. Therefore, we don't have an asset to capitalise, therefore we need to bring that back into our operating. In terms of timing, those discussions with Massey University would lead us to go into that design phase before the end of the financial year. So there will be other decisions coming back to this council, but if we don't make a budget provision, we won't have that option to do it.
So am I correct to assume that the work wouldn't start until those decisions have been clarified and made?
That's correct. So from the resolutions of councils, it was for us to go and have discussions with Massey University. We'd be bringing the results of those discussions back to the table.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We've got through the questions of the first one. So we will look to, and maybe if I just ask the officers to step back if there are any comments. So look, we've got the deliberations here around council resolving and receive. 1, the engagement summary. Attachment 1, 2, the summary of submissions, attachment 2, and then officer comments to the summary of submissions, attachment 3. I'm happy to move those. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll just open up and saying thanks to the wider council team that have pulled all this work together. It's an unusual that in a normal annual plan year that we do so much work in this space, but it is an unusual year. So we've still got a number of things to go through, but I think because we've done so much work in preliminary, it's actually set us up quite well. There's been a number of things, and I think it was borne out with some of the questions where communities or various parts of our community have continually come back to us about different wants and needs. I'll leave it at that. But I think we do either need to listen or we don't. And I'm of the view that we should be at least keeping an ear to the ground on what the wants and needs of our wider community are. And we know that people have pulled back as well. I mean, there was a number of submissions where people and organisations had told us their own journey of pulling back internally, but still with an eye to the future, requesting or asking of council if there was some way that we could keep the fires burning or the future planning going. So we'll go through that in a moment, but just acknowledge everybody that's worked in the space and the hard work of councillors that have been out there listening to everybody. I'll open it up. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, found both the work of staff and the work of the community very helpful in this space. I think it's really helped us shape up what we're about to get to work on here in terms of the list of recommendations, hearing those community needs. Having attended some of those face-to-face consultation opportunities or engagement opportunities leading into this, I did enjoy them, but I think we could and should be looking at some online and more flexible options there. Asking the community to come all the way to us proved to be, I think, too often too high a barrier, and it's really helpful to get that engagement up. So I'd like to see us in future, and certainly the long-term plan, looking at some online virtual engagement opportunities alongside some of the face-to-face stuff that we tested out again this time around. I think officers did a great job actually bringing together the overall submissions analysis and is very well presented back to us and very helpful. I think the themes that are identified there, they resonate quite well and are probably ones that we expected to come through, but really good to see that community expression there. A couple things that I would comment on in that space, seeing that cycling was the most commonly commented on area, 1 in 3 submissions in that space. Climate was 1 in 5 submissions. Some very strong themes there, and I think that sets us up really well. We're on the cusp of a budget that will put in place the most active transport effort that this city has seen. And knowing that we have that backstop of community support and community interest to be going in that direction around active and public transport in the year ahead is very helpful markers for us. And so, yeah, really wanted to acknowledge both the community's voice here and look forward to being able to address the number of specific recommendations that I think relate quite well to the engagement and consultative process we've been through. Thank you.
All right. I thought there might be a few more comments, but that's fine. I'm sure there will be as we go through. Okay, well, there's no need for a right or reply. Let's vote. And that has passed 16 votes for, none against. Okay, because this one affects the revenue streams, we've pulled this up next, but then we'll go through the different additional recommendations from various councillors. So this is around one of the appendix papers there, which is around the shortfall in the swimming or aquatics budget. And it was from recommendation 3 from the officer's report, and it's around councillors resolving page 211 of your papers. It's around council resolving that we approve the following changes to charges swimming pools effective from 1 July 2023, a maximum increase of 80 cents for casual admittance charges, and B, a maximum increase of 15% for concession charges. Nobody likes to raise prices, but it's the choice of whether we drop the levels of service or we tip a whole lot of extra money in as well on top of what we already tip in. So I took the officer's advice on this one, and I felt it was a happy balance in the overall scheme of what we're trying to do here. Remembering that we already have quite a large concession for under 5s and their parents or companions, so that was brought in mind as well. Okay, the Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor. Tēnā tātou I hui hui mai nei. Just to, we are in comments, aren't we? Ka pai. I think we heard loud and clear from people who made submissions about the needs for the recreational users, for the sports users of aquatic facilities, and I agree with you with your earlier comments that to reduce the services would be detrimental to the experiences that our community have with aquatic activities. And therefore, I really strongly suggest that we go with this. I support this. There are also avenues for other places like schools to subsidise some students and other facilities if people are struggling with that. But I don't believe we could do away with any of the services. It's greatly needed, and we got that information from those who came and represented so well the aquatic needs. Kia ora.
Councillor Johnson.
It's just a quick question through you, Mr Mayor. If concession charges are increased, does that mean we have to increase the budget that we have for swimming for under fives?
I don't think I can answer that. I'll have to go to the officers.
Kathy Deaver-Todd, it's a really good question, and it is based on demand on that program. We have managed to deliver that program within the budget, or very close to it in each year. So I would say that the level of difference in value we could probably accommodate within the budget.
Okay, thank you.
All right, councillors. As I said, it's on page 211 if you wanted to refresh your memory on that. And the options were maintain the current level of service and increase the funding, reduce the level of service, or a combination of both. And you have the moved and seconded recommendation in front of you, so I ask you to support it. Right, we will vote. Thank you. As passed, 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we'll now move through to the operational additional recommendations from operational budget changes, clause 2.2.1, and the first of those comes back to our opening report from our planning team, which is around council resolving to increase the planning budget for Plan Change H, Kakatangiata, by 341,000 and create a planning budget for industrial growth of 150,000. That's moved by Councillor Wood. I ask you to speak to that, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I want to start by thanking my colleagues for pushing this through into the annual budget deliberations earlier this morning. What we're seeing at the moment in our quarterly reports is a result of underfunding our planning services throughout our city. We've had to, or our planning team have had to effectively raid other budgets to pull the money in to undertake the work that needs to be done. And what I would say is ad hoc funding our core council plans, or our core council plan changes, it isn't only unsustainable, it's not good practice to be continually having to pull in funds from other sources to undertake the work that we as councillors expect our officers to do to reach the targets that we have put on place for our officers. Our plan changes would have to be, for me personally as a councillor, my single top priority. I would prioritise funding the work that is being done over almost anything else. We as a country have a population of 5 million and the same amount of land as the UK, yet our land prices are comparable because we have artificially put boundaries on our cities and urban areas, which has driven up the price of land across this country. This is a forward-thinking, I'll talk to Kakatangiata specifically first. Planning for the next 30 years of growth by developing a new suburb is a forward-thinking way in which we can help reduce those land prices and in turn reduce the cost of housing in our city. Every person who moves from a first home into a new home in this suburb frees up not only a home in the city, but creates a new home in a burgeoning suburb of Kakatangiata. And so when we look at what we've budgeted for this year, we've given our officers $74,000 to undertake the work needed for a 30-year piece of growth. That is not satisfactory to the tune of 341,000 as our officers have outlined to us. And I appreciate our officers bringing this to us because what we spoke about in workshops and some of our council meetings is that it can be a little bit frustrating to hear, well, we've slowed progress on Kakatangiata down because we don't have the funds. And we as council have said, well, tell us how much you need so we can weigh up that decision against our budget. So that's what we have the opportunity to do today. And I think, in terms of our goals as a city of growing, of providing small city benefits, big city ambition, I was about to say big city living, in terms of what we as a council are trying to provide for our city, this links with our goals. We're not only looking at medium density in our city, but we're also looking at expanding, given the rate of growth that we're seeing. If we look, our team have an exceptional record of budget efficiency in this regard. Hamilton has spent $1.3 million on their medium density change. We, on the other hand, have spent 10% of that, 130K, to get to the position that we're in. So I don't have a view that our officers are wasting money or spending frivolously. The barrier to create these kind of zone changes and these kind of plan changes has increased over the years as case laws developed in the RMA and as more requirements have been put upon councils in terms of the evidence required. We've seen in the report 17 different expert reports required for just the Kakatangiata piece of work, some of which we can do in-house, but some of which we aren't able to do. So in terms of funding, whether or not we view funding Kakatangiata as a priority, I would see this as one of Council's most innovative initiatives to practically deal with the challenges we see, and I'm very comfortable supporting giving our officers the budget they need to get this work through. In terms of industrial growth, slightly different argument there, I've seen firsthand the impact of a shortage of industrial land that's had on our city. Land prices have gone up to over $350 a square metre for industrial land, compared to where they were 5 years ago, around the $250 a square metre mark. So as a city, we are putting a massive cap on the ability of industrial growth we have. We've got providers willing to pay incredibly high prices for our industrial land because of the unique position we're in as a distribution hub in the centre of the North Island. The North End industrial rezoning is good, and it is. I'm pleased to see the work the council has done in that regard, but there are restrictions around that space in terms of noise, in terms of pollution, in terms, not pollution, noise pollution, and operating restrictions due to there still being a number of residential homes in that space. And so it suits light to medium industrial quite well. In terms of space for medium to heavy industrial, I certainly view us as having more work to do to provide land we need for the operators that want to make Palmerston North their home, particularly as we move into the Te Tanganui space and have a central distribution hub based here. This work is becoming more and more important because the value proposition for companies coming to our city starts today. We can't wait 5 years for when the distribution hub's finished to go, let's start looking at what industrial zoning needs to be done. We need to look at it now. And so for those reasons, although I recognise the burden this puts on our rates, and I don't do this with any exceptional pleasure, knowing the impact this will have on our rates, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate, the importance of this work, I believe, far outweighs the cost in terms of what we do for the next 30 years of people and beyond living in our city. So I hope you'll support me in this.
I'll add to that. Thank you, Councillor. Look, I seconded this, and again, it is another additional cost. But I think the paper that came to us gave a good business case of why we should be doing this work, and it is a continuation of the good planning work that this council's done. You need to just go to some other cities to see examples of perhaps poor planning and where things are based and things aren't connected. Our city actually has very good connections, but we're entering, as Councillor Wood said, we're entering a new phase, and it's and sometimes that work falls a little bit lumpy too on where you're doing things. With the looming RMA changes, if we don't do this work, I do think we've put the city at some risk, not only in housing, but also around the logistics, distribution and associated transportation needs of that commercial industrial growth. We don't know what the future holds around that regional spatial planning. I'm not sure even the officers know as well. But all I know is we can move quite quickly and perhaps determine or influence what that future might look like. Some of the answers there around the core planning funding, I think does need to be addressed, and I think that's maybe a debate around the LTP as well, but also dedicated budgets to that larger, chunkiest pieces of work. And I think the officers did outline that very, very well. And then perhaps put up some other case studies from other councils to just show us what others are doing and actually the very good value that we are getting at a local level. As Councillor Wood, I think this really does help us in terms of the housing side for the next several decades, not only Kakatangiata but other places as well, because there will be some residual or leftovers where we can actually help what we're doing with Ashurst and Akauteri and other places, but also supplementing that that sector of logistics, distribution and transportation. And remember, we play a vital, this is a New Zealand Inc. discussion too, because we play a vital role in the national supply chain. So if Palmerston North isn't operating efficiently, then the Lower North Island isn't operating efficiently, and so and we connect to the South Island and obviously up to the upper north as well. So councillors, I do hope you can support this. If we don't do this work, I do think we are playing a bit of Russian roulette, and there is a little bit of risk for us of not being able to complete some of this work. So please support it. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I fully support this recommendation and support the arguments that have been put forward so far. Just want to talk about perhaps some new arguments. The first one is that I think if you asked anybody in this city what the most important priority was, they would say housing. When we ourselves sit around the table and talk about what's our first priority in council, housing is there. When the Tepu Harakeke did the Social Wellbeing Forum, housing was one of the top 3 issues. I just think that there's no argument amongst anybody in the city that we don't have enough housing, we don't have enough of the right housing, that housing's too expensive. Any way you want to play it, housing is where it's at, and council has limited means of influencing the housing outcomes as a whole. Here's one of the means that we have got. And this is a limited time opportunity, as they like to say in sales talk, because regional planning committees are coming. And regional planning committees take our ability to be the masters of our own destiny away. And they will determine what the priorities are. And they may not determine that planning in Palmerston North for housing is a priority. So if we want to get this done, we've got a short period of time to actually do it in. And we have been asking repeatedly why it is that we're not meeting the KPI of zoning enough land for the city. And the answer is clear when we look at how other councils are resourced, that we're not putting enough resource into it. So it's a very simple equation here, which is that if you want the planning done in a timely manner to the standards that are required at the moment in terms of environmental reporting, in terms of social wellbeing outcomes and so on, then you have to put the budget in to enable you to do that. I thought it was an absolutely excellent report from the officers, and it really outlined how they've managed on a shoestring budget, quite frankly, so far. I suspect that even this won't be sufficient, but it is at least an improvement and will accelerate things. But, I mean, when you look at other cities, our budget for this type of work has been hugely underdone, hugely underdone. So I think if we want to make a difference in the housing field in terms of availability and in terms of cost, affordability, and in terms of things that we can influence, this is where we can do it. And remember that these things have a long lead-in time. If we approve this now, it's not going to be houses built next week. You know, we're talking years ahead. And so the time to do it, if it wasn't, yesterday, it's definitely today. So please, councillors, do support this. I understand it's additional money on the budget, which none of us really wants to do, but this is vital that we do this. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I absolutely agree with the previous 3 speakers. It's a very strong argument that the paper puts forward, and I don't think anyone around this table would find a good reason not to progress this. So I will be supporting this recommendation. However, I am really hesitant for us to be putting the rates up another 0.5%. That would sort of push us up to the 7.2, 7.3 sort of increase, which I'm not comfortable with. I think whilst it's been acknowledged this is probably one of our very top priorities, my view is that there are likely to be other things in our plan that are perhaps less urgent and less important. And I'm just wanting to indicate at this point that myself and Councillor Wood will be putting up a recommendation a bit later, looking to offset this cost and potentially, depending if there are other costs, through the reduction of some other less urgent work. So, but very happy to support this in the meantime.
Councillor Zabellum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for an excellent report. I thought at paragraph 1.6 it stated that this work will require a focused effort over the next decade, which I thought was a very succinct summary of the need for action now. This is the plan for the next 30 to 50 years, and we have to put the work in to get the ball rolling in earnest so we can get in front of some of those dependencies, aside from resourcing, that are slowing it down, such as the speed limit issues. Because there is time pressure, as Councillor Johnson said. We have a window of influence over planning in the city, and the window is closing. And the stronger the trajectory that we set in place now, the stronger our chances are of getting good outcomes and the future fit outcomes that we're wanting to see for our city when it comes to development and growth and how we want to grow and where. Once those regional planning committees do come into effect, we just become a chapter in a regional plan that's put together by what is effectively an external committee with a much wider focus than just our city. So the work we do now puts us in the best possible position to be influential in that space when it comes. And we heard from the officers today that while this is somewhat of a moving feast at the moment, what the investment in the planning work that we make now may well be transferable or at least alignable with the changes that are going to come. So it's not wasted work, it's really laying a very strong foundation for us and for the future. And as Councillor Johnson pointed out, there are a huge housing need. This is the kind of work that will pay dividends into our housing situation for decades to come. So it's worth the investment now. I think 3.1 to 3.3 of the officers' report was a very on-point summary of the impacts that this legislative change will have on our city, but also on the council and how we function and what kind of influence we're going to have. With the way things seem to be going at the moment in terms of reform, we have seen time and time again that if we're looking for co-investment, if we're looking for financial support from central government, then the best thing we can do is to have really strong plans in place, really strong strategies and really well-formulated business cases so that things are shovel-ready to attract that level of investment. So I think if we are adopting this, we are positioning ourselves really well there to attract that kind of co-investment. And also, not only by resourcing this properly, we can make the best use of our excellent planners while we have this current system, but perhaps we can actually build capacity in that team because we can attract additional capacity to that team by this opportunity to build a lasting legacy in our city and actually start the next chapter in its growth. And that I think can be a huge attractant that we could leverage to help overcome some of those resourcing capacity issues that we've had as well. So I'm very happy to support this. I think it's a very sound investment that will continue to give back to the community for long past the time that we're all around the table. So I encourage you to support it as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, right of reply, Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, colleagues. I'll just make a brief right of reply on a few points that haven't come up. One of the things I forgot to say is that this will also ease the pressure on all of our other planning avenues. So by doing this, we're not just supporting Kaketangi art and industrial growth, we're actually supporting all of our planning avenues by taking some of that pressure off our limited staff capacity. By way of an example, Hamilton City Council's Plan Change 5, which we have in our report, 7,000 lots, 600 hectares, they've spent 1.4 million plus. From what I can calculate off the figures we've got, we've spent around $1 million, so they're about 40% more on a similar type of plan change. So this is really just bringing us into line with what other cities are doing. And in terms of the risk, I'm sure many of you probably haven't read the opposition's plan for housing, but if the government does return and regional planning committees come, then we've discussed the risk of not doing this work. The opposition, if they end up in government, they're going to require councils to zone for 30 years of growth regardless. So if there is a change of government, we'll have to do this work anyway. So what we're doing here is getting ahead of the curve regardless of what happens at the election, which I think is sensible. So I really appreciate all your support and encourage you all to vote in favour of this.
Okay, councillors, we will vote. As passed, 16 votes for, none against. Right, we're through to number 3. And this again is an additional recommendation around operational budget. And it is around council resolves to include an operating budget of $60,000 in the 23-24 budget to support 1 month free travel when the new urban bus network launches in 2024. Councillor Barrett, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. We're off to a good start. So this is in response to Horizon's submission where they asked us for support in the launch of the new bus service, which is coming up in the next few months with the launch in February. And really it's about making sure we get the community on board and give the community a chance to experience the improved frequency, the improved speed, the improved user experience firsthand, and some free journeys as a means to support that. So hopefully there's reasonable recognition in the room of the value of doing something in this space and responding to Horizons proactively here. It's the biggest step change and improvement in public transport that we've seen in this city, certainly in a generation. I think the question is more around how we might go about paying for this, and it has been suggested to me that we take things from existing funds like the Low Carbon Fund. I'd like to offer some reasons why an operating budget standalone is a more appropriate approach. First reason is that if you look at it from a fairness point of view, public transport delivers benefits across all 4 goals. It gets people to work, it gets people to all sorts of social and cultural opportunities, as well as supporting emissions cuts. So I think it would be a little bit unfair to go after a funding source that was specifically around Goal 4 when we've got a public transport service that's supporting all 4 goals. Second reason is around scope. The Low Carbon Fund is set up specifically to manage in-house emissions. It is not a community-wide fund, and the request here is very much in that community-wide emission space, which would put it out of scope for the Low Carbon Fund. Thirdly, as a financial reason, the Low Carbon Fund's a capital fund, and this is clearly an operating expenditure because it's a check that would be written to Horizons in this case, so it's not appropriate to be using capital funds for operating purposes. The next and probably to me one of the most significant reasons is around good governance. So we've set up the Low Carbon Fund and delegated that to staff to manage. They have an investment process around that. It's a rigorous in-house process that staff operate. And I don't think that we as a council should be setting a precedent of dipping into those sorts of processes and funds just as a matter of convenience. Whether it was any other community grant fund or whether it's a Low Carbon Fund, we should be sticking with good governance and taking the approach of simply approving an additional investment here in this one-off case. Finally, I'd say this is actually consistent with historic precedent. So before COVID, we had a line item operating budget for supporting bus service promotions. And obviously with COVID, there wasn't much point spending it at that point. And if you remember the 1.9 or 2.1% budget, that was one of the things that got cut. And so this is really just bringing it back in a one-off case, in a very timely one-off case with the launch of the new service. ultimately, there's a really great value proposition for the community here. This is a $60,000 expenditure. That's about 65 cents per person. So if somebody gets on the bus just once, they're actually financially ahead. And if they get on the bus for the whole month, they're doing quite well indeed. And that's exactly what we want to see in this community, is more people getting onto the bus service and making good use of it, so that they're freeing up that most important car park that everyone else is chasing. So I would ask you to support this as an investment in response to the requests we've had from Horizons.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Absolutely delighted to speak in support of this recommendation, and I agree wholeheartedly with all of the comments made by Councillor Barrett. Elected members who've been around the table for a while will know that my interest in this has long been about how we get our children to school. And I've been excited this year with the budget announcements from the government about enabling cheaper or free access to public transport for our children and into our student community. And Palmerston North has a really good track record in this space of our regional council working with our tertiary institutions to enable access to public transport. Because what we know, and this isn't just a public transport discussion, but the habits and patterns that are formed in childhood and early adulthood last people through into their adult lives. And what we experience at the moment, and I think we're all familiar with it, is that New Zealand and Palmerston North are a very car-dependent society. And we see the outcomes of that in the kind of conversations we have around parking, around congestion, about the economic impacts of those considerations, which have been well covered in this chamber even in recent months. So this is an opportunity to step into a space where we have, I'd say, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to come in on the back of the decision about bringing in a wholly electric fleet of buses into the city and bringing in the new timetable, which will have a significant effect on how people feel about public transport. So what we want to do is to take that opportunity to get people onto buses at the time when they have the best chance of that being a good experience that can be supported, that will help families get children to school, maybe gets a car off the road for that particular purpose, and steps into creating lifetime habits that serve them well in our city and will serve them well wherever they go into other places that also have good public transport. So that's why I'm supporting this. I think it's a decision for today, but it's also a decision for our future, and I'd encourage your support. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Could I ask a question, Mr Mayor?
Of who?
The mover.
Yes.
Just want to get an understanding if this will just be subsidising the buses that operate within Palmerston North, or if it will also subsidise the Palmerston North to Fielding routes.
It's only within the urban space, so unfortunately, in my view, doesn't connect with Fielding, but it's just Palmerston North and Ashurst.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this. I think that our ratepayers shouldn't be subsidising Horizons for this initiative. I think our Chief Executive has put a big effort into trying to put a budget together for us to try and manage, and going forward we're trying to manage that budget on behalf of our ratepayers, and to put 60,000 aside for Horizons when they should be doing that themselves is something that we should treasure for our own purposes in terms of the City Council. So 60,000 is a lot of money for this city that we should look to putting towards our coffers and not towards Horizons. It's a nice to have, not a must have. If it was a must have, then I would support it, but it's a nice to have. So I'm saying no to this, and I will look to other things today, because today's going to be a really tough day that we're going to have our nice to haves and our must haves. This is a definite no for me for a nice to have, so I'm very sorry to the mover.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, looking at budgets just in an annual plan without having a longer term view, we lose sight of the fact that as a council we're going to have to put in millions for the configuration of the bus terminal for our city. And that's a responsibility that lands on us. And I'm not so sure we're going to be going to the regional council saying, can you kind of give us several hundreds of thousands to contribute to that? And so that's my point. We are invested in the space, and it's just not in this year necessarily. The second point is around, this is a one-off tactic, and I'd rather go for ensuring that we had apps in place where people can actually look up and make sure they knew where the bus was en route and how long they had to wait at the bus stop, and have confidence they hadn't missed the bus, for example. And that type of technology, I think, would actually activate people using the bus more readily. If that's not in place at the moment, I think that's more important. The other thing is that the government have thrown a ton of money at this for children 5 to 12 and half-price discounts for 13 to 24, and so there are subsidies in this space already in the next coming financial year. And for us to go over and above, I think, is losing sight of the fact that all ratepayers have to pay for this, whether they're using the bus or not. It's a one-hit wonder of a one tactic of many that could actually give greater benefit. And actually, we're heavily invested in this space, just not this year, because we've got the bus terminal investment coming in the following years. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will not be supporting this, just simply on what's been covered, and I think Councillor Denison covered it up pretty well. But we can see already what the rates this year are going to climb to. And I think giving out lollipops is not a good time of the year to be doing it. And really, a free ride, I think Horizons have it pretty well covered. I received a thing in the mail this morning about the new electric buses. So I think they've got it covered as to where they go and what they're doing. I don't think we need to actually go and take 60 grand off our ratepayers to cover it. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I also agree with the previous three speakers. I won't be supporting this. In an environment where we're really constrained financially, I'm not comfortable with writing a cheque out to Horizons for this. The point that Councillor Bowen made around children is absolutely correct, and I think often in local government we see a central government putting things into our responsibility where perhaps they should be delivering on that. And for a nice change, we see that government is actually stepping up in this area with the half price and free fares. So I think it would be unnecessary for us to double up in this way in order to achieve that outcome.
Councillor, before I go back to you with right of reply, I'll just make a couple of comments. I was somewhat mixed on this because actually I was one of the architects of encouraging the regional council to bring this forward. Unfortunately, I thought it could have gone, and for very different reasons from what the mover was talking about, through our low carbon fund, which actually, if you take a holistic view, this would fit in there. But unfortunately, at times around this table, we get tied up in bureaucracy and policy, and we do get quite blinkered. I think you'd almost get unanimous support if it was going through a low carbon fund. And as we're seeing around the table, there is some differences in opinion. Recent RTC figures, this would benefit, I think it would really benefit, and all the reasons that have been made for it are valid, but in reality it's going to benefit about 400 daily passengers compared to our other 95,000 odd residents. We do want it to go better, absolutely, and we did make an offer some years ago, but it was declined unfortunately because, not of COVID, actually was because of the B card coming into place, and it just, things weren't aligned. I have some real sympathy for it, but I'm probably, because of the timing and our pressure on our rates, I can't see how I can justify this to somebody in Terrace End or Milson or somewhere else, that their rates will continue to go up along with their regional rates, which are considerably going up, with the electric buses being purchased, with the considerable increase in the upgrade to the services, which I think can be justified by our regional colleagues. But there is an element of proving the service and making sure that it does work by itself. And as Councillor Dennison and Councillor Naylor said, there's been a lot of helping hands already from government and other subsidies. So does the council need to do this at this time? It's probably a nice to have. So in that case, I won't be supporting it, but I do have some real sympathy, and I will have to apologise to my regional colleagues, having thought there was a possible mechanism through the low carbon fund. And for all the reasons why we can't use that, it is what it is. So, yeah, thank you. Oh, you've slipped in, Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I failed to push the button twice. I just wanted to stand to just address a couple of the points that I noted that, as Councillor Dennison suggested, an app would be really useful. There is an app that exists. It does show live times and buses that are running late, so that is already in operation by Horizons. Also, that it's my understanding that Horizons is contributing to free public transport travel as part of this initiative as well. So this is a joint venture, I guess, is my understanding. Happy to be corrected that they are putting money up for this as well. The other thing here was that we have also received central government funding for the infrastructure of the bus stops. So the increase to our expenditure is really in the ongoing maintenance of those rather than the bulk cost of installing those in the first place. And the final point, I think, is in Goal 4, with our eco-city goals, what we're really trying to tackle there is behavioural change with transport. And because we are a very car-centric city, we are a rural landlocked city. We have a lot of travellers from outside of the city. But for the people who are living within the city, that behavioural change or the behaviours that we've seen, what is putting people off public transport? It's a poor service that's not fit for people's needs. I've experienced that myself a lot. The cost of living often has people looking at other options. What are the options to be getting around if they can't afford to run 2 cars anymore, or if the cost of petrol, is becoming prohibitive? And looking at our public transport services going, well, that's not an option for me because the service is not frequent enough, or it doesn't come to the right places, and all those reasons that put them off. What we really need is a much better service, which is coming, but we also need to rebuild public confidence in that service so that people will actually use it, because it is proven to work, it's proven to be fit for those needs and helping to provide people with options when their options are becoming constrained. So I feel that this is a good opportunity to say, here is the new service, have a go. Does it meet your needs? Is it going to work for you as an option, as a viable option? Maybe not for all your transport, but maybe for some of it. It's a way to start building that trust in the service so that we can start driving that behavioural change. And behavioural change is a really hard thing to try and get at from behind and to try and encourage. I think that this is a really good way to encourage people to dip their toes in the water and see if it is something that's going to help them, and is it going to make their lives better or at least cheaper. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Right, a reply, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for some insight into where priority sits in your views. Just want to raise a couple points. The first is around partnership and working effectively with partners. We work with Horizons in a number of spaces, but one of the ones that we're most active is in the provision of the bus services. We've been through quite a long and extensive process to actually get to the point of launching something together with Horizons to serve the needs of our community here in Palmerston North. And it would be quite a shame if, after years of effort to get this new service lined up, to get it ready to roll, we aren't in a position to put in a relatively modest amount to help this off to the best start possible. Getting more people on the bus is a situation where everybody actually benefits. There tends to be a perception around we're giving something to some but not to others. When we get more people onto buses, we get more space for other road users to get around more efficiently. So it's contributing from productivity right through to emissions reduction. It's a case where everyone benefits, where we do get more people using our public transport services. And with this reset of the service, again, once in a generation, this is the best chance that we will have to get more people on the bus in a long time. And what we hear quite often is concern about wanting to get more people into that habit. So great way to start that with a relatively modest investment, 65 cents per person in this city, to see that this next generation of public transport is the best that it could be, and I would ask you for your support.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, we will vote, please. And that is failed 7, 4 and 9. Sorry, I wasn't reading that properly. 9 against. Okay, we will move through to the next one, and this is again operational budget changes and an additional recommendation around Council resolving to increase Te Manawa Museum Trust operational grant by 250,000, 23-24 year to support Te Rangi Whenua exhibition, this Extinctions Dinosaurs exhibition and the Peter Bush Archive projects. Moved by you, Councillor Bowen, seconded by myself. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Elected members, you'll see I've got a few recommendations coming forward that respond to reports and presentations that have come through the Culture and Sport Committee, and this is the first of them. Te Manawa have asked us to put in $250,000 to support 3 specific projects. They're not asking for an increase to their operating budget. They're doing their very best to cover their business as usual within their existing operational grant. But elected members will know that that is not an easy process for Te Manawa at the moment. I'm sure you've noticed their reduced opening hours that have now taken effect, that they're no longer opening on Mondays. So that's not easy for them. Staffing and fixed costs, as we know around this table, are taking an increasing proportion of the operating grant. It's taking more money to do less. We know that's the case for council. It's certainly no different out in our community sector. So Te Manawa's request is asking for our help to respond to 3 particular opportunities that have come their way. Or maybe the first one's not really an opportunity, more of a crisis. The Te Rangi Whenua space in Te Manawa, which elected members will be familiar with. Some of us were there at the weekend for the City Welcome and Porphyry. That space has long been in need of some work, and it's been an aspiration of Te Manawa over time. Their work is progressing in the planning stages, and I was delighted to hear from them just this week that they've confirmed partner funding from Central Energy Trust, as indicated in the supporting information that you have. But that funding is now confirmed at just under $100,000 to support this Year 1 programme, which is what they're looking for our help with. The total programme will come in at about $500,000. So this Te Rangi Whenua project responds to the aspirations of Rangitāne and Te Manawa's developing relationship with Rangitāne as a Te Tiriti partner. It's an important step in making that space usable. I would hate to see it sit for another year as a dark space that we're not enabling our community to use, and says something really unfortunate about the state of our relationship with Rangitāne, which is not how we see that relationship. So I think this is important that it advances, and the Te Rangi Whenua part of this budget bid will enable Te Manawa to do that. The 6 extinctions part of their application is quite different. They've come to us for this as an opportunity to partner with Canterbury Museum, which has been an aspiration of Te Manawa's for a long time, to get a toehold into those touring exhibitions that are really high quality. And this one is about dinosaurs, which always seems to tick a lot of boxes for our community. The proposal is that this would go upstairs, it would run alongside Santa's Cave through the summer, so really increasing our visitor offering over that peak season. Unusually, and this maybe reflects a different direction of the new CE, the intention is to offer this free to our community. So, maybe that's a response to the cost of living crisis, but their intention is to offer product alongside it to try and make some money back on the side, but not to charge for access to this. And the proposal is that would be a partnering opportunity with wild-based recovery, because the sixth extinction required to is the current extinction crisis that we know our environment is in at the moment. So sits well with our wider sustainability goals there. And finally, the Peter Bush Archive project is, we're a very small partner in that. This is a really big opportunity for the city. We're expecting at least lotteries funding, and there are other large funding opportunities to support this. So our council contribution is a small part of the cost, but a huge part in supporting those external funding applications to enable that really significant, nationally significant archive to come to this city. So there are many and varied reasons why we're putting these things forward for your consideration. I recognise that this is a difficult time to be asking for additional money into this space, but I hope I've explained why each of those three projects are worthy on their own, and Te Manawa have put forward some supporting documentation, which is at page 211, I think, of the papers, if you want to remind yourselves of their very good reasons why this is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Look, I seconded this and I will support it. And just a couple of additional comments, because I think the movers articulated it quite well, what we're trying to do here. I believe this is another access sort of debate. Do we allow access to the important sector of arts, culture, heritage and science? And I believe we should. I'll leave the famous Churchill quote to the end, but, we've got partners here in this facility with Rangitane, and that gallery, Te Rangi Whenua Gallery, is in need of some refurbishment. So obviously this is something I believe is pretty fundamental we should be doing. The second two, as the Councillor Bowen articulated too, the dinosaur one speaks for itself, but it's the access that we're trying to do there. Some will remember dinosaurs did come to us some time ago, but there was a charge to that, and we only got part of it as well, and it was very much had to entirely wash its face, and it was a struggle. The Peter Bush one, I actually worked with Peter Bush years ago when I was in Wellington, and his photographic archive is world-renowned. And we've been lucky enough, through our partnership with the New Zealand Rugby Museum, to be able to partner in this in a small way. The project's probably upward of about 350,000, and it's got the ability to tour and do all sorts of things. So, again, it's really about what Churchill said. When his war cabinet said to him, we're cutting the arts budget, he said, why the hell are we fighting for? Support this, please. The Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor, o tira tēnā tātou. I too support what the Mayor and Councillor Bowen have said. Te Manawa strives, like all the museums around Aotearoa, New Zealand, to preserve, interpret and promote the natural and cultural history of humanity, and in particular here. The Ministry of Education, when they introduced Aotearoa New Zealand histories, that precipitated an increased interest in local history, not just by the 15,000 students we have in Palmerston North who are required to study this, but also their teachers, their families, those citizens who have an interest in local history, who enjoy learning about Palmerston North. And what they learn about is how our histories have shaped our current day and our future. Having a resource like this also provides the opportunity for us, for our students, those 15,000 that we have in Palmerston North from year 0 to year 13, to be critical thinkers and understand our past in order to make sense of the future, of the present and the future. Palmerston North City Council and our CCOs recognise the relationship established by Te Tiriti o Waitangi and accept that the principles of tino rangatiratanga apply to us, and also in this case the work, the exhibitions that we have, and the preservation that rangitane and iwi Māori have shared, donated or lent to Te Manawa. When we as councillors went through Te Manawa, I was, I suppose, flabbergasted at how horrible that space was for rangitane. It was dark, it was dingy, it had very little. What we did have in there was sparse, and then we went into the back, and there were all these fantastic taonga that people have donated. They have donated their taonga. You know, many Māori hold on to those things. They don't want to share those because they know how precious and valuable they are. But every one of those beautiful taonga, the number of korowai that I saw, I thought, wow, those are hidden from our people here in Palmerston North. And other taonga as well. And they need to come to the front. They will provide so much information about the past, give us support for where we are now, and show us our inheritance, what we have inherited here in Palmerston North. So I support this. Kia ora koutou.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I think it's really interesting hearing the comments that are being made. The outline of these programs on page 211 fails to convince me of the need for this. If you look at the detail, it's talking about object cases, display cabinets, 100,000 for light fittings, storage and consumables. It's not exactly urgent stuff that our community should be paying for when we're already putting their rates up significantly. And yes, they have actually asked for more aside from that. If we look at the page before that, we're already putting up the grant to Te Manawa from 3.35 million to 3.5 million. That's an extra 150,000. And so if those things, if there's a space that's dark and dingy for rangatane, my view is that that should be prioritised within the 3.5 million grant that we're already giving them in order for them to address those issues. I certainly don't see a need to increase it more than 150,000 at this stage. And saying the grant that already is included in our budget is already in excess of our LTP amount of 3.43 million. So I feel that we're being very generous, and I think the grant that is already within our budget should be sufficient to deliver the aspirations through appropriate prioritisation.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just wanted to add a couple of points to the debate. I do support this, and I think we need to take a view of the last few years and how our cultural organisations have really struggled through COVID. Places like Te Manawa and the other cultural CCOs have had to close their doors. They've had to have restrictions on the numbers of people that could come in. It's been very difficult to do touring exhibitions, and it's been a very difficult operating environment for them over the last few years. And I think coming out of that, there needs to be a kind of a stimulus. We need to understand that we need to provide additional support so that they can make a bit more of a launch into the community. We know that, again, and we're going to refer back to the Social Wellbeing Forum report, we know that there's a significant amount of social isolation in the community at the moment, that people are staying home, they're not necessarily going out, they've got out of the habit of going out and socialising. And we need to make sure that our cultural organisations are providing attractive content stimulating exhibitions that will encourage people to take that step out and make social connection again. And I think it's a one-off request for additional funding. I'm sorry, but I'm not buying the argument that, they're getting an increase anyway, because that's a CPI increase that happens to cover cost of inflation. These are additional projects that they're wanting to do on top of that. And I agree with the Deputy Mayor. When we did the tour around Te Manawa, it was, I think, quite shocking, actually, some of the facilities that staff are working in, some of the ways that staff are needing to make ends meet to try and, be able to produce a good exhibition. There's a lot of constraints on Te Manawa in terms of storage, in terms of the environment in which things are being stored, and in terms of staff themselves. So, I think in the long-term plan we need to take a good hard look at how we do fund our museum. If you're going to have a museum, a store of culture and science and art and history, you need to fund it adequately. It needs to reflect the community's aspiration in this area, and I'm not convinced that we're doing that for Te Manawa. This, I think, is a stopgap for 1 year, but I'd certainly like us to take a look at funding over the longer term. So I do hope you'll support this. I think it's very important.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it would be marvellous to see these extra exhibitions and things like that in Te Manawa. I think it would be great for the city. But if I went to the ratepayers and I asked them, what would you like to have these fantastic displays and exhibitions come to the city, or would you rather have lower rates? They would say to me, lower rates, please, because they can't afford it. People on low incomes can't afford, as Councillor Hapata says, the nice-to-haves. This is a nice-to-have. Our ratepayers can't afford the nice-to-haves at the moment, so I will not support it.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am actually going to support this, and I'm only going to make a couple of points about it. First of all is that we must not lose sight of the regional importance of Te Manawa, and the fact that it goes beyond just exhibitions. It actually brings value and investment into the city. So there are some things which we are talking about here which some of you are not yet turning your mind to. History and heritage are very important to the fabric of our city, and it is part of the social capital that we actually need to invest in to make our city a much more livable place. So please support this.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it won't come as a surprise to any of my colleagues. I didn't support this coming here. I don't support this now for a few simple reasons. I want to start by talking about the struggle that our CCOs have had over the last few years. I don't buy into the story, I'm sorry, that the mover put forward that, oh, well, they've got more money to do less. Well, that's why we've given them an additional $150,000 so that they can continue to operate. So they are getting more money to do what they were doing, just as we are doing for our own organisation, providing that support in line with inflation. So I don't buy the story that they're having to do less with the same. They're getting more to be able to continue to operate the way they've been operating. But I want to address this point in particular around Te Rangi Whenua. How do we support rangatane in our Te Manawa space? We do it by providing Te Manawa with a $3.5 million grant from Council. If Te Manawa don't value providing Te Rangi Whenua as a top priority in their budget, that is a shortcoming of Te Manawa's, not a shortcoming of this Council's. That says in the report here, the original budget allocated towards this project was $15,000. But then they wanted to provide more, which is admirable, yet their budget continues to only be $15,000 toward this program. So if they are not prioritising this, that is not our shortcoming. We fund Te Manawa to provide these kind of programs, and I am not comfortable sitting here and saying we as a council are at fault. No, no, no. They have made a conscious choice not to fund this,
and that is something they need to bear, not us. In terms of the remaining programs, around Six Extinctions, which is a travelling exhibition, Te Manua operates a number of travelling exhibitions over the course of the year. I presume they have a budget for bringing travelling exhibitions to town. They have chosen not to prioritise bringing the dinosaurs to town in the Travelling Exhibition Fund. That is their choice. We trust them as our museum to make those decisions. And I'm not comfortable with them saying, oh, well, we'll just put it back on council because we want to do above and beyond what we have budgeted for. If they needed additional budget for this, it is not the responsibility of our ratepayers to be making up additional programs that Te Manua wants to operate above and beyond what they are funded to do. In terms of Peter Bush, why bid for something that you can't afford to service? What commercial program operates that way, that we go around bidding for programs and then say, oh, well, but actually we can't do it because we don't have the money to fund it? I mean, it is ridiculous. And so, in terms of Councillor Finlay's comment around what our ratepayers would want, it was Councillor Johnson who said that for those who aren't counting the dollars, the cents probably don't matter. But for those that are, every dollar counts. And we have people in our community who cannot travel to work or to school or to where they need to be. We have people in our community who are struggling to afford rubbish bags. We have people in our community who are struggling to put food on the table. And frankly, I do not see providing an additional travelling exhibition, providing an additional photo service or storage service, and providing a program that the Te Manua has chosen not to fund as a priority for our ratepayers in our community. So I'm sorry I'm passionate about this, but I have no appetite for us as a council being blamed for Te Manua choosing not to prioritise these items in their budget. And so in that light, I will not be supporting this, and I hope my colleagues won't as well.
Councillor Harper.
I said this was going to be a hard day. I am actually going to support this. The reasons I am going to support it is that Te Manua is actually a tourist attraction for us, and it does attract people into it for that reason. And we need to have attractions in our city to attract people like visitors that bring people into the beds in our city, that bring a lot of visitors into our city. And we need that, because if we don't have that, then the wheels don't spin in our city. We also have people that go into Te Manua that just go into there to get some peace and to have some space, that they need to go in there and just chill out. And Te Manua does that. So I'm supporting it because we need to put this in there, because this new CE has come in and done a great job of, how do I say it, throwing things up in the air and letting them fall and saying, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, but this is how it's going to work from now going forward. And this budget that she had doesn't quite work, and now she's trying to make it work. So as a council, we need to get behind her and we need to help her make it work going forward. So that's what I think as a councillor. I'm going to support it for that reason. I think these exhibitions will be a great attraction for our city, and I'm supporting it for that reason. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm really challenged by this. The fact, again, using my point in the previous debate around having a look at an annual plan versus our long-term investment. And in our long-term investment, we have multi-millions investing into Te Manua. And so I find the quote from Churchill, cutting the budget for arts, what are we fighting for, a little bit off-putting, actually, because in this environment, we're not cutting the budget, we're increasing it, and it's already going in the draft plan, an increased budget from this current year. So what he is asking for is an addition to the addition. And so when every dollar counts in this environment, people are wanting to have as much choice as possible to get through the week and with sites to get through the year. And I don't see the sense why we would rate people more to give more free services that they don't get to choose in, to give a free Sixth Extinction exhibition when they might not even go and visit it. Why should we rate our ratepayers for another free service when they could actually, if they wanted to put a tariff on the entry fee, people could choose and contribute to it? That's what they've done in other regions, actually. So I'm comfortable around this Monday being closed. I think that's just a prudent approach to get through the season. I don't have any concerns around that. That seems like an operational decision they've needed to make to keep staff across the board. I am pragmatic, although I would move an amendment to this resolution that figure becomes 135,000, not 250. I recognise that that would cover at least the Te Rangi Whenua project, or within their own reconfiguration with the board of Te Manawa, working out what are these other projects they could still progress with their current budget. So my amendment is changing the 250 to 135,000, and I do have a seconder. Councillor Naylor has indicated and can confirm that she's happy to second. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, let's just give Tech a moment to put that amendment up. So can you just can you just confirm the exact wording?
All I'm changing is that red text that's been changed from 250. The rest of the which. In fact, I don't even think. Yeah, and you can delete. In 2023 and take out to support the actual identified programs. I think it's up to Te Manawa to work out how they allocate their increase. So in my amendment that I'd put a full stop after 24 and take out the definition of what that increase is for. Thank you.
Yeah, we're just getting it up. Just give everybody a moment. Okay, so we've got the amendment there, moved by VD, it should be. Moved by Councillor Dennison, seconded by Councillor Naylor.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, just for a point of clarification, if the amendment fails, does it automatically go back to the substantive? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll just discuss the amendment and Councillor Fitzgerald.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, colleagues. And I'm impressed with the amendment to the substantial, and I will be supporting that. The only comment I wanted to make that at $2,500 per light just begs belief, in my opinion. Not that I'm an electrician by any means, so I'd be looking forward to making sure that those costings are tightened. I would like to propose, though, that we put back into the amendment Te Rangi Whenua. I would hate to see that $135,000 go into the extension or something else. I think the intention from the previous speaker was that it was to support the Te Rangi Whenua exhibition. Thank you.
Unfortunately, that's not your choice. That's up to the... Okay.
Point of clarification, Mr. Mayor, if I may. The cost for the lighting was covered by the Central Energy Trust grant, and I assume they know how much lights cost.
Anyway, people can discuss that in their comments. So look, okay, so now we've got is that correct? Is that what you're, okay, great, okay. All right, look, as much as I want to see things happen, I think we're missing the bigger point here. We're starting to pick winners and losers. I won't support it because for all the very reasons, and there has been a couple of comments around we're already giving them more money and everything else. It's their CPI funding increase. So we just got to get real on this. Go around the country and see what other cities put into their cultural facilities. Te Manawa is a regional facility, and when you look at what the wider rohi that it acknowledges and serves, with art, with culture, with heritage and science, we're so fortunate. So I'm more of the opinion that we go back to the substantive. I absolutely do support Te Rangi Whenua space, but also the other projects are important too. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that, and I prefer to go with the original substantive. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I'm delighted at the level of support for Te Rangi Whenua. Thank you, colleagues. That's, I'm sure, heartening to Te Manawa. But I won't support this, and I will continue to advocate for the substantive motion. Te Manawa are trying to bring us a balanced programme. That's what this is about. They're looking at the opportunities that are in front of them and trying to balance those opportunities against their founding principles, which are not just about their cultural work, but about their partnership with the Rugby Museum, about their focus on sustainability, about their work with arts and culture and heritage. And so for us to say we prefer one part of their work over the others, I think is a little disrespectful of the way Te Manawa is established as a combination of founding societies. And so I look forward to those of you who are supporting this, supporting the substantive, where we will get to support Te Rangi Whenua in its fullness. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. While I do appreciate the effort from Councillor Dennison and Councillor Naylor on the prompting of Councillor Fitzgerald to include Te Rangi Whenua, my preference is very much around the full package. I think, going in here with a cutting approach, it's also very much the wrong signal to be sending still a relatively new management team and a relatively new board leadership team of Te Manawa as they are now reactivating coming out of COVID. This would just be all the wrong signals from a relationship point of view, as well as undermining some of their best opportunities, like the dinosaur 6 extinctions. Like, that's the way to actually get people moving and in the door and excited about what Te Manawa is coming from. And if it's traveling and it's creating a buzz elsewhere, it's creating buzz back here as well. So I'm very much of the view that we do go with the full package, and would say that this is very much the wrong signal if we start sending in cuts and yes/no kind of signals to Te Manawa at this point in their journey. So I'd urge you to reject the amendment and support the substantive.
Councillor Johnson.
Just to signal that I won't be supporting the amendment and will support the substantive. And just in response to some comments that some elected members have made about what ratepayers want, I just thought it might be useful to quote one of the submissions that we received, where a ratepayer, at least I assume they were, said that they wanted us to stop cutting things because they wanted to live in a good city with things to do and good infrastructure.
Okay, back to you, Councillor Dennison, for right of reply.
I think there's wide support for the Te Rangi Whenua, and hence why I wanted to make a provision for that amount. I think the Te Manawa board and their management should have the decision of how they split their budgets to incorporate some of these other activities, whether it's subsidised, do, full or otherwise, with their other existing budgets. I mentioned before, this is something I'm comfortable around, the Monday closure and all these other things, and they need to get, they're the creative centre of our city, and I think they need to get creative on how they use their budget. Not go to ratepayers who are actually feeling the pinch. The cost of living is being felt, and as interest rates, as people roll off their interest rates with their mortgages, are going to feel it more so. And I would rather have our residents and ratepayers not be burdened further with rate increases getting into the 7% and beyond. And so I guess this is the fight we're in. If you're asking the Churchill quote, what are we fighting for? I'm fighting for our residents to not be burdened with increased rates in a year that's probably their winter's budget year to get through with the cost of living. So there you go, Mr Mayor, thank you.
I'm glad it's before lunch anyway. All right, we're going to vote on the amendment. Thank you. and that's failed. 6 votes for and 10 against. All right, we've got the substantive up there. A few of you have already commented, including myself, so we're not going to go through that again. Nobody else wishes to comment. I'll go back to you, Councillor, for any right of reply.
Thanks, colleagues, and I do recognise that we are in a difficult debate today. Councillor Dennison said the Te Manawa Board should have the decision, and Te Manawa Board have exercised their decision. They've made decisions, and their decision was to come to us and ask for additional support for particular reasons. And I've outlined why I think each of those reasons have their own distinct merits. Councillor Dennison also said, what are we fighting for? Well, I think what we're fighting for is quality of life. What we're fighting for is this being a place where we walk backwards into our future, where we recognise, I think that's the quote I'm looking to the Deputy Mayor, where we recognise that we learn the lessons of the past and that informs the future that we choose for our community. Yeah, that's our choice, that's our job as elected members. We're choosing a future. And the future that this enables us to choose is one that is well informed by our partnership with Rangitane, by the environmental place in the world that we stand in and the decisions that we're facing in that space, and the history of our local community and holding that as Tonga for the future. So I really would hope that we can support this even in these difficult times. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, we will vote, please. And that has passed 10 votes for and 6 against. All right, you've earned your lunch, as Churchill would say, so should go and get a photo of him and stick it up somewhere. Okay, we're going to have lunch now, and we're back in the chamber at 1:40. Enjoy it. Thanks.